Mr. Speaker, recent reports suggest that President Trump may attempt to dismantle the Department of Education unilaterally. An executive order of this nature would be catastrophic for the tens of millions of students and teachers in schools across our nation, including in the great state of Colorado. It would undercut support for children learning to read and write. It would, in my view, scrap key programs for high school students looking to get their college degree and abandon hardworking educators, schools, and students for rural and low-income communities. Mr. Speaker, any effort to unilaterally dismantle this department would be clearly unconstitutional and unlawful. And House Democrats will use every tool available to us to stop it. I yield back.
Nick?
I want to ask about your litigation working group. Where do you see what do you see as the place for Democrats in the litigation landscape, given that we've seen a number of lawsuits from unions, and then what do you see as potential targets for litigation?
It's a great question. First, I would just say more broadly, as you know, Leader Jeffries has made clear to our caucus that this is an all-hands-on-deck moment, that we all have to be prepared to work together, collectively, collaboratively, to do our part to oppose any executive order or administrative action that is unlawful, unconstitutional, or that would directly harm the American people. And the litigation and rapid response task force that you mentioned is a clearinghouse for us to develop legal strategies. We have a number of accomplished lawyers, folks who have deep expertise, and we want to leverage their talents and their strategic thinking. The working group task force will be meeting in the coming days, and so without getting ahead of some of our preliminary conversations, we'll have more to share in the coming days.
Thank you. Veronica with CNN. Can I get you to please address the price, the increase in spending to military and defense and border security? Are you guys going to try and negotiate that number down by any chance?
You know, I'm happy to defer to my colleague, Representative Panetta, who's been a distinguished member of the House Armed Services Committee. I would just say more broadly, that will be something that the Ranking Member Boyle, of course with Budget Democrats and Leader Jeffries, will work through in the coming days. The plan, as we referenced, was just released an hour and a half ago, and it is unclear, by the way, that there is any consensus, far from it, within the Republican caucus. I mean, the Republicans are fighting, House Republicans are fighting amongst each other, can't find their way to putting something on the floor of the House. House Republicans are fighting with Senate Republicans, and as Representative Escobar so eloquently put it, meanwhile, over at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the Trump administration is endeavoring to dismantle a variety of different federal agencies piece by piece. So it is chaos and confusion on their side of the aisle, and will, of course, have internal conversations about the right way forward with respect to particular reductions or increases, as you mentioned, in that space. I don't know, Representative Panetta, you want to, or Representative Escobar, either of you want to.
No, I mean, look, I think it's clear Democrats support strong national security, and we support our border security. And when it comes to these types of increases, as the Assistant Leader said, these are something we'd be happy to talk with them about. As we know, the reconciliation process is a partisan process. They're going to try to do it on their own. But as Mr. Neguse so artfully said, they're having a hard time doing anything over there, especially when it comes to putting together these types of numbers. So they can say they're for strong national security, strong defense, they want more border security. Question is, and they got to answer this, how do you pay for it? Look, we saw in the 118th Congress, they can't govern by themselves. I think we're going to see going forward in the 119th Congress, we're going to be in the same predicament. Hakeem Jeffries has made it clear to Speaker Johnson, we are more than happy to work with you. But if you start threatening our values, if you start threatening our national security, if you start threatening immigrants who contribute so much to who we are in our economy, in our society, for what we stand for with our humanity, that's when we're going to fight back.
Can I say, I'd like to add something because I also served, I'm now on the Appropriations Committee, I was on the Armed Services Committee. I have the privilege of representing Fort Bliss, Texas, the second largest military installation in the country. As my colleague, Mr. Panetta, mentioned, we absolutely support a strong national defense and smart strategic border security. What the Trump administration is doing, though, I think, especially for those of you looking at Pentagon spending, it's going to be very important for all of us to look at how they are spending those dollars. And I'll give you a couple of examples of egregious waste by the Trump administration, not 1 month into this administration. In my district, the Trump administration is deporting migrants from Fort Bliss using C-17s, which cost exponentially more than the regular commercial flights used by the Department of Homeland Security. And I think part of this is being done in order to, for show, but it is costing the American taxpayer exponentially more, and it's coming from DOD spending. He's also opened up Guantanamo for migrants. We don't know exactly who is being sent there. They claim it's folks with lengthy criminal records. I think the state of New Mexico found otherwise, but that is exponentially more expensive than what we have seen so far. So we are going to do a deep dive on all of this, but I think the fundamental issue here is don't believe what they say, watch what they do. They claim that they are targeting waste, fraud, abuse, and they're saving money. The opposite is true. Elon Musk, the fact that he has purview over Pentagon spending, he has something like $15 or $19 billion worth of contracts. Is he going to audit that? Is he going to audit his own contracts, or is he going to look at cost savings there? This is all smoke and mirrors, and we are not going to fall for this. We're not going to let the American people fall for this. None of this is going to help the pain that Americans are feeling when they go to the grocery store, or when they fill up at the pump, or when they try to save for a house, or when they pay their rent. All of it is a sham. And it's a way to make sure that the rich get richer. Fundamentally, it's about greed.
Obviously, the economy is top of mind for Americans. It dominated the election, but several voters supported the Republican Party, supported Donald Trump because of mass deportation plans, because they didn't like the student loan forgiveness plan. There were a lot of other reasons outside of the economy that voters supported the president and Republicans down ballot. What's your message to those voters out there who may support an immigration crackdown, who may support some of the other issues that Donald Trump campaigned on, not realizing that the economy would take the effect that it has so far? What's the message to those voters out there as you move forward?
I would say I think we could spend a great deal of time analyzing the last election and the various reasons why the outcomes, ultimately were a number of different issues that, I think were important to the American people, as we've talked about. But fundamentally, and I agree with Representative Escobar, who I think articulated this well, cost of living was front and center. Inflation was front and center as an active matter of deep interest by the American public in the last election. Republicans were elected to a majority of the House, majority of the Senate, and of course President Trump was elected. They now have the ability to do something about it. The question is why they aren't doing something about it. And you don't have to take my word for it. The CBS poll tells you all you need to know. 66% of Americans believe that this administration isn't doing enough to lower costs. That means Democrats, that means independents, that means Republicans. It means Americans who are struggling to survive each and every day, from Colorado to Texas, New York to California. They are asking us, and we are asking this president and House Republicans, why? Why not address cost of living? Why break your promises that you made to the American people just a few short months ago? I think it's a fair question, and I hope it's one that everyone here asks of the House Republicans, who meanwhile are taking every action conceivable to do the opposite. Because we know that this rip-off plan that they're pursuing within the Budget Committee will increase costs, not decrease costs. You don't decrease costs by gutting Medicaid. So that's my view.
For being here today.
Thank you. Gentleman from California yields. And I'll recognize the gentleman, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Neguse, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and thank you to each of our witnesses for being here, for traveling to Washington, D.C. In some cases, we appreciate your testimony. In particular, I want to thank my good friend and someone whom I think has been an exceptional public servant in the state of Colorado for many, many years, and that's Commissioner, State Representative, State Senator, and now, of course, Executive Director Gibbs. And couldn't agree more and concur with his assessments regarding what needs to be done with respect to a number of the issues that he described. And of course, I'm biased because he is my constituent back in Summit County, Colorado, but we're grateful for him being here. I want to just follow up, Mr. Canterbury, sorry, I hope I pronounced that right. Is that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, great. I want to follow up on a particular provision of your written testimony. So I believe this is the second to last page. You write, as one of, it says, while the list is not exhaustive, I offer the following suggestions for immediate action. And one of those suggestions, you've underlined it, direct targeted resources to environmental analysis and permitting for rangeland monitoring and grazing allotments. What do you mean by targeted resources?
So, thank you, Ranking Member Neguse. It's a pleasure to be here today. So, what we're talking about there on those targeted funds, if you will, we need to very specifically target some funding. Every agency, as you know, is out of funds. We need some funding directly for the monitoring protocols.
That's right.
That we all live by.
Yep.
So the agencies can get this monitoring done.
So here's why I asked. No, you answered the question. Thank you, Mr. Canterbury. And because you've resolved that in my mind. I just want to make sure I understood that. When you said targeted resources, what you mean is targeted funding. That's the word you used. I concur with that assessment. Were you invited here by the majority or by the minority of this committee? As a witness today.
That's a really good question. I'm assuming I was in. Why
don't I answer that question for you? You were invited by the majority, and we're delighted to have you. In particular, as a Coloradan, I'm certainly delighted to have you here. But the reason why I say this is my colleague from California, took great umbrage with the idea that the Democratic witness and Democratic members of Congress are demanding more funding, and yet. Right here, one of your principal recommendations, and it's a common sense recommendation, by the way, is for more funding for this particular, the nature of the work that you've described. And it's not all that complicated, right? I mean, many of you have testified about multiple use, and, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, agree with your assessments regarding timber sales or energy leases. Who manages those? Who would you go about calling if you were going to try to procure a timber sale? How does that happen? Mr. Canterbury?
So, Ranking Member, thank you for that question. I don't deal in the timber industry, but I certainly deal in the livestock industry.
Sure.
And my cows eat the understory and
Yes,
keep
sir.
those succulent vegetative
But where would you go
plants.
about procuring a grazing lease? Who do you go to?
So
You go to the federal agencies, right? You go to the BLM.
I deal with my local agency folks. Yes,
Correct.
sir, I do.
Exactly, right? They're federal employees. These are individuals who work for the federal government, particularly the BLM, right? The same can be said for any number of the multiple uses that this committee is apparently endeavoring to discuss today. My broader point is that as we're discussing multiple use and the benefits of multiple use and the need for the federal government to be more responsive, a mile away, President Trump is endeavoring to gut every federal agency piece by piece. Mass rescission offers, buyouts, so-called buyout offers to the federal government, including some of the same BLM employees that you work with, sir, that every witness here works with. And it feels a little bit like we're in the twilight zone here. That we're supposed to have a sort of normal federal land subcommittee hearing to discuss the propriety or the benefits of multiple use and ignore the storm that is developing around us. I mean, I'm sure you all are aware of this. Agencies are being shut down here in Washington. CFPB effectively just a few days ago. I don't know if the BLM will be next. I suppose we're going to find out. So I would just encourage the chairman of this subcommittee, and I want to give him my sense. We certainly are not going to treat these hearings as business as usual until our colleagues on the other side of the aisle step up, tell the administration to pull back, and we can get back to regular order. Because there's a lot that these witnesses have proposed that is reasonable and common sense and bipartisan. But let me assure all of you, none of it will come to fruition if the current administration has its way. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I'll recognize the gentleman.
Motion except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees, and 2, 1 motion to recommit. Section 3, upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House a joint resolution, Senate Joint Resolution 11, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management relating to protection of marine archaeological resources. All points of order against consideration of the joint resolution are waived. The joint resolution shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the joint resolution are waived. The previous question shall be considered as order on the joint resolution and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or their respective designees, and 2, 1 motion to commit.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 hour.
For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, pending which I yield myself as much time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 177 provides for consideration of 2 measures, H.J. Res. 42, H.J. Res. 61. The rule provides for both bills to be considered under closed rules with 1 hour of debate each, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their designees, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. Additionally, the rule provides for consideration of S.J. Res. 11 under a closed rule with 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or their designees, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this rule and in support of the underlying legislation. The rule before us provides an opportunity for Congress to reverse the last-minute attempts at regulatory overreach by the former Biden and Harris administration. The rule includes consideration of H.J. Res. 42 to provide for congressional disapproval of an 11th hour Biden Department of Energy rule relating to, quote, energy conservation program for appliance standards, certification requirements, labeling requirements, and enforcement provisions for certain consumer products and commercial equipment. This rule was rushed out by the Biden administration as they worked overtime in their final days to get a fresh round of burdensome product mandates out the door. The rule in question is just one example of the former administration's war on products that the American people used to take for granted, affordable, reliable home appliances. In an effort to appease a woke mob, the Biden DOE foisted burdensome regulations atop a certification and efficiency standard process that was already drastically broken. The rule in question requires additional certification, additional labeling, and for manufacturers to meet additional reporting requirements. By the Department of Energy's own estimates, this one rule will increase annual costs for manufacturers by $213,000 and result in thousands of hours spent on additional paperwork to meet the new requirements. Now, make no mistake, with every new standard, rule, prohibition, and restrictions on manufacturers, the American people are left with fewer options that are more expensive and too often perform worse than previous models. In the last 4 years alone, the Biden administration issued 31 regulations aimed at residential and commercial appliances and equipment, with a total cost to industry and ultimately to the consumer of at least $60 billion. Mr. Speaker, the American people, they are fed up with the micromanaging regulatory agenda of the previous administration. Their voices were heard very loudly on Election Day, and President Trump has already delivered on his promise to bring the regulatory relief to Americans, pausing implementation of 7 of the Biden administration's restrictive mandates on home appliances in an effort to undo the previous administration's burdensome policies that have driven up costs, reduced choice, and diminished the quality of Americans' home appliances. Real financial pain is felt by Americans when rules like this one take effect, and it falls to Congress to ensure that the Department of Energy can course correct away from these anti-consumer and anti-choice requirements. And in that spirit, the rule also provides for consideration of H.J. Res. 61, providing for congressional disapproval of the rule submitted by the Biden EPA relating to the national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants for rubber tire manufacturing. Section 112 of the Clean Air Act mandates emission controls for sources of 187 hazardous pollutants, and the EPA is expected to establish technology-based emission standards for sources of these pollutants, as well as specify categories of sources subject to emission standards. However, surprising to no one, the Biden administration's EPA, at the behest of a radical environmental group, has disregarded a technology-based, fact-based approach and completely weaponized this process against the industry. In a flurry of regulatory activity in their final hours in power, the Biden EPA finalized a rule to impose unnecessary new regulations on our tire manufacturing industry, all with zero environmental benefit. This is the legacy of not just the Biden administration, but also the Obama administration nearly a decade earlier. A weaponized EPA working at the behest of radical environmental groups to roll out regulation after regulation that drives up costs, kills jobs, and shutters domestic manufacturers, all in the zealous pursuit of the left's Green New Deal agenda. If the EPA's final rule is allowed to survive, we will see tire manufacturers sink millions of dollars into new compliance costs, spend thousands of additional hours in meeting requirements of this rule, and struggle to keep manufacturing here in the United States. This rule shows us an agency that has moved hastily to comply with frivolous lawsuits, using questionable data in the process. And for decades, the left has used a sue and settle strategy to force the EPA to push for a more aggressive, more onerous, and less affordable set of standards on American job creators, American workers, and American families. As a representative of Western New York and the Southern Tier, many of my constituents were recently laid off after a tire manufacturing facility announced its closure in decision to move overseas, where CO2 emissions will almost certainly be higher and the requirements around environmental stewardship are far less stringent. This is the reality that awaits America's domestic manufacturing base if we allow our regulatory agencies to cater to the radical left and asinine Green New Deal fantasies, as they are doing with this rule. H.J. Res. 61 will ensure Congress, through the Congressional Review Act, can put a stop to these unnecessarily new costs that threaten the viability of American manufacturing. And finally, the rule before us provides for consideration of H.J. Res. 11, which provides for congressional disapproval of a rule submitted by the former Biden administration relating to, quote, protection of marine archaeological resources. Mr. Speaker, despite the innocuous name, the rule itself could not be more ridiculous. Federal agencies have spent hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars surveying the seabed of the Gulf of America and have identified to date approximately 4,000 shipwrecks and other sites. Yet this expensive and time-consuming work is apparently not enough. Under this rule, oil and gas operators seeking to drill offshore in the resource-rich Gulf of America are now required to do their own additional surveying to, quote, better protect shipwrecks and other cultural resources on the seabed. It is lost on no one that this is highly redundant, unnecessary regulation is nothing more than a last-ditch discriminatory action by the Biden administration aimed right at our nation's oil and gas industry. The mandate will force companies to spend untold resources scouring the seabed for potential shipwrecks, even without any previous indication that such sites may exist. To be clear, there is already a regulatory framework to mandate a report on potential sites on the seabed when the regional director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has, quote, reason to believe that an archaeological site may exist. So let's stop pretending that this rule is anything more than a continued effort to bury companies in reporting, run up costs, eat away their time, and move the goalposts for American energy producers. Time and again, we've seen these tactics used by Democratic administrations in Democratic-run states when it comes time for our oil and gas producers to get to business. In my own state of New York, the few oil and gas producers hanging on in a state that has made it very clear that they are unwelcome face a deluge of unnecessary and redundant compliance costs like these, meant to do one thing: put them out of business, shutter an industry, kill jobs, and leave our nation more reliant than ever on foreign energy sources. That is what will come from the left's overzealous war on oil and gas production. We simply cannot allow these asinine rules and regulations to go forward at the federal level. SJ-Res will ensure that Congress, in lockstep with President Trump and his administration, can break down the barriers set up by the Biden years and bring down costs of everyday Americans. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy, for the customary 30 minutes, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to try to clarify for the American people, those who may be tuning in, certainly the individuals who've joined us in the gallery today, what this debate is all about. Just by way of context, let's consider what's happening in the world today. I don't know if my colleague from New York has checked his phone, but the stock market is plummeting. Plummeting. 401ks of residents in New York, residents in Colorado, wiped out. Massive tariffs that the President of the United States applied to our neighbors at midnight that we know will increase the prices of everything. Groceries, fuel, energy, you name it. Mass layoffs of federal workers, mass purges of veterans at different federal agencies, mass terminations of Forest Service employees in my district working on wildfire mitigation, scientists at NOAA, individuals doing cancer research. All of that is happening as we speak. And here we are in this august body debating what? Labeling requirements for appliances. That's what the Republicans have decided to spend today debating. Labeling requirements for pool heaters. I don't know. Maybe that's, I don't know if the gentleman from New York has a pool. I don't have a pool. I don't understand why we are wasting time in the House of Representatives debating regulatory requirements for pool heaters, labeling requirements for coolers and air conditioners. Seriously? Stock market is crashing? And this is how House Republicans choose to spend their time? Government funding is about to dry out 10 days from now? And we want to spend our time talking about pool heaters? Give me a break, Mr. Speaker. Let's get serious. This isn't what the people of the United States elected us to do. I would implore my Republican colleagues, come to the table Work with us in good faith. Stand up to the Trump administration that is dismantling federal agencies in your own districts. Social Security offices being shut down. Constituents who can't get services from the federal government because this president has decided to dismantle these agencies piece by piece. It's time to get our priorities right, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure you that the priorities that the House Republicans are pursuing today and have been pursuing for the better part of the last 2.5 months are grossly out of step with the values of the American people. It's why I would hope every member of this body would oppose the rule. And I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Well, I'd like to remind my Democratic colleague that the rule we're debating today provides for consideration of H.J. Res. 42 regarding a Department of Energy appliance rule, H.J. Res. 61 regarding an EPA national emission standard rule on the rubber tire manufacturing, and S.J. Res. 11 regarding the EPA's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management rules requiring burdensome archaeological reports on energy producers. There'll be ample opportunities to debate, amend, and provide suggestions when the appropriate authorizing committees move forward when we begin our work on spending reforms in a budget reconciliation package. We should focus on the legislation before us this week, and I encourage my colleagues to engage in regular order as we're authorizing committees begin to work on our reconciliation and not prejudge their outcomes and make baseless assumptions. You know, my colleagues across the aisle have mentioned how they find these measures not worthy of our time. And this certainly isn't the first time they've mocked House Republicans' efforts to curb regulations on appliances, from heating systems to dishwashers, refrigerators, and freezers. But if this were such an unserious endeavor as my colleagues across the aisle claim, then why did the administration they supported for 4 years issue at least 31 regulations covering a vast array of different appliances and other products out of the DOE and the EPA? Is $60 billion foisted onto our nation's manufacturers and consumers in new regulatory and compliance costs not serious enough for Congress to thoroughly scrutinize? Democrats seem to be confused about what it is that the American people voted for in November, and one of those items was lowering day-to-day costs that are hurting workers and hurting families. Reversing these regulations is something that House Republicans are deeply committed to doing, and we are working with the administration to actually get this done. I'd also recommend that my colleagues across the aisle speak with the fellow Democrats in their conference about how harmful these regulations are and why CRAs to reverse Biden's anti-energy and economically harmful regulations are so important. Last Congress, Democrats voted with Republicans to pass at least 5 measures to halt Biden administration green energy regulations, including the following: a CRA to halt the Biden definition of the waters of the United States. 9 Democrats voted yes. A CRA to halt draconian emission standards on heavy-duty vehicles. 4 Democrats voted yes. A CRA to halt draconian emission standards on light and medium-duty vehicles. 8 Democrats voted yes. In this Congress, a whopping 11 Democrats voted just last week in support of a CRA on the Biden administration's rule on energy conservation program to conservation standards for consumer gas-fired instantaneous water heaters. One of those appliance-related regulations that my colleagues here today claim is not worth our time in the House, but their colleagues voted yes. And finally, 6 Democrats voted yes on last week's CRA to halt the Biden-era implementation of a natural gas tax that would harm our nation's energy producers and consumers. The Democratic Party is busy pulling their hair out over President Trump, Elon Musk, Doge, whatever else is their outrage of the day. But they've lost sight of the kitchen table issues affecting everyday Americans. They ignore the rising costs, hurting workers and families in order to cater to their own extreme left-wing base. It is so bad that even members of their own caucus are breaking ranks to vote for common-sense reforms, such as the rolling back these radical anti-energy agenda items that the Biden administration foisted upon us in the 11th hour of their administration. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Yeah, I think the Speaker, it feels like I'm living in the twilight zone. Again, I understand the gentleman from New York very much wants to spend a half hour debating labeling requirements for pool heaters. I get it. We all get it. It's important to you. It's not important to me, not important to the people that I represent. In the 5 minutes that you just spent describing the reasons for this bill in your view, the stock market has continued to go down. More corporations have announced that they'll be increasing prices later this week because of President Trump's tariffs. I don't understand how you believe that that is lowering costs. Again, I would implore my colleagues, let's get serious. There are plenty of substantive challenges facing this country that merit and warrant the attention of lawmakers here in Washington. And for the record, House Democrats are not scared to debate any single one of them. Apparently, reports this morning indicate that in the Republican caucus meeting, a member of Republican leadership stood up in the meeting and supposedly told his caucus a simple instruction. Not a single one of you should attend or participate in a town hall. Why? Because they are scared of their own constituents, Mr. Speaker. They understand that if they hold a town hall with their community, they will hear outrage from everyday American citizens who are pissed off, who are angry that the prices for everything are going up because of this reckless Trump administration's policies. Again, you want to spend a half hour, an hour, 8 hours debating labeling requirements for pool heaters? Be my guest, but don't expect House Democrats to participate in it. I want to yield now to the gentleman from California, Mr. Speaker, because if we defeat the previous question, I'll be offering an amendment to the rule to bring up H.R. 1637, the Protect Veteran Jobs Act. Mr. Speaker, we have a distinguished member from the great state of California, Mr. Derek Tran, a veteran who served our country honorably, who can speak to the reasons why this amendment is so important. And I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman to do so.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. The gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Colorado for yielding. I rise to urge my colleagues across the aisle to show some humanity and compassion to the thousands of veterans who have been recklessly dismissed from their civil service jobs at the political whim of this administration. The men and women who serve our country deserve our unwavering support, not broken promises. The indiscriminate firing of veterans by the Trump administration and Elon Musk dishonors the unwavering commitment that these public servants have dedicated to our country. These heroes stepped up for us, and now we must stand up for them. This issue is deeply personal to me. I am the son of Vietnamese refugees who fled war and persecution in search of safety and a better life in America. This country welcomed them and gave me the chance to succeed. I joined the Army out of a sense of duty to my country because I wanted to give back to the country that gave me so much. I wanted to protect the very principles of freedom, justice, and decency that we hold dear. But I don't see these values in the actions by the Trump administration. I see only chaos, fear, and cruelty. I have a duty as a congressman, as a veteran, and as a proud American to stand up for those who made the highest commitment to us. That is why last week I introduced my first bill, the Protect Veteran Jobs Act, to reinstate veterans who were recklessly terminated without cause under the Trump administration's purge of the federal workplace. My bill will also hold the executive branch accountable for any future terminations that may occur. This isn't about politics. This is about basic decency. This is about treating our veterans with the dignity they deserve. Veterans make up 30%, over 30% of the federal workforce. And when they are unjustly removed, it impacts all of us, from delays in healthcare services and disability claims to staffing shortages at the VA. The consequences for the American families and service members are dire. Veterans have always had our backs. It's time we step up to have theirs. I urge my Republican colleagues to join us in opposing the previous question so that we can take up this important measure to restore the livelihoods of veterans who have served our country honorably and who have continued to do so through civilian service, Let's reverse course immediately and get these veterans' jobs back. Thank you, and I yield back.
And yields back. Gentleman from Colorado reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, you know, we listen to calls from our Democratic colleagues for compassion and concern. I must ask the question, where was the compassion and concern while they watched prices skyrocket over our constituents over the 4 years of the Biden administration? Where was the compassion and concern where the Biden regulatory environment smothered the U.S. economy with regulation after regulation, trillions of dollars in off-budget spending, and it soared inflation over the American people? Where was that compassion then? Where was the outrage when House Republicans were calling for relief for the American people for the last Congress? They said that we were following the wishes of only President Trump. They follow the Green New Deal playbook to a T, and that's what we're here to debate today, are these important rollbacks of the Green New Deal agenda. I mean, we sat idly by and watched our country get invaded by at least 10 million people that came across this country with the direct will of the president to do it. President Trump has proven in just less than 2 short months the ability for a president to roll this all back with executive order. Yet the cost to New York alone was $7 billion in costs on New York taxpayers. Where was the outrage then? For 8 years, this hysteria has cost them. While they persisted in their witch hunt of President Trump in 2022, Americans contended with 40-year high inflation after Democrats and President Biden dumped trillions of dollars into a recovering post-COVID economy, which even one of their chief economists told us that would create massive inflation. They ignored that guidance. Did they seek to address everyday Americans' concerns about the direction of our economy? They did not. They doubled down on lawfare against President Trump, and they lost them the House in 2022. And in 2024, when the world was on fire, with our borders, they were flung open to the invasion of millions of illegal aliens into this country. They prompted a crisis in countless communities, including my own, with Americans' #1 concerns coming back time and again, poll after poll, as the economy in our border. Democrats did no work to address those concerns. Did Vice President Kamala Harris? No, she did not. She didn't make that sale to the American people when she was campaigning across this country. Instead, all we heard was about Kamala Brat Summer and the last-ditch jittery attempt at once again trying to convince Americans that Trump was somehow a threat to democracy. And Democrats lost historically on November 5th, 2024. They lost the electoral vote, they lost the popular vote, and they lost every swing seat on the table. Did Democrats learn from this smarting defeat since President Trump took office? They clearly have not. Instead, they focused their time again defending USAID slush funds, flat-out government waste, and pretty much every problem trying to lay it at President Trump's feet, including what he's doing every single day, as well as DOGE, and how they're trying to fix the crisis in the mess that was left behind by the Biden years. Mr. Speaker, the American people have time and again responded to Democratic hair-pulling with, at best, disinterest. Yet here we are today on the House floor with more of the same. The rule before us considers legislation focused on ridding American consumers in an industry of harming regulations that are truly impacting their wallets and their financial well-being in our nation's economic future. I urge my colleagues to quit the hysterics and for once listen to the voices of the American people after years of refusing to do so. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I've got great respect for the gentleman from New York. And, we have a lot of folks who come to Washington, D.C. to observe these proceedings. And I suspect it might seem a little rote to them. Would love to have an actual debate. Maybe there's some folks here from New York, some folks from Colorado who'd like to see us engage in some substantive debate. And so I might ask the gentleman from New York, because he ended his last remarks by appealing to the voices of the American people, and that he and his caucus, in his view, are standing up for the voices of the American people. I wonder if the gentleman might answer a question. Mr. Langworthy, have you held a town hall this year? It's not a rhetorical question. I'm just asking. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, if I might ask the gentleman from New York, I believe colloquies are permitted in this chamber for the staff on the other end. At least that's so I am asking, rather through the Speaker, to the gentleman from New York, if he has held an in-person town hall with the people of New York that he represents this year. I'm just curious. He doesn't have to answer if he doesn't want to answer. I don't say yes or no question. It's not a complicated question. Okay, I'll take it as a no. I mean, clearly he's not held a town hall in 2025. I think he would be jumping up to clarify the record that he in fact had met with his constituents, Mr. Speaker, if that were the case. He clearly has not held a town hall. I understand why. I get it. Because at this juncture, if House Republicans held town halls as their constituents expressed their outrage and indignation at the mass layoffs of federal workers, of civil servants, and at the tariffs that are increasing prices, and at the stock market crashing, if their only response is we took up a really important bill this week on labeling requirements for pool heaters, I could understand why one would have some trepidation about hosting a town hall in those circumstances. Again, let us be serious about the work that we are called to do in this body. We're here to lower costs for working families, to build safer communities, to ultimately ensure that the American people, the American taxpayers, the Constitution is vindicated. It is unfortunate that my colleagues don't feel the same way. I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen a lot of masterful theatrics out of the Democratic Party recently, and we're seeing nothing different from that today. It's amazing that people that are so concerned about burdensome regulations and costs on people offer no solutions. We are here doing the work of that today. We are taking price concerns off of the back of industries. We're preserving jobs, and we are creating a brighter future for our communities by getting rid of this 11th hour rulemaking that was put forward by the Biden administration. They had all the power to make this country move in the right direction when Democrats controlled all of Congress and the White House following the 2020 elections. They had the ability to make those changes, but they took the country in the wrong direction. And that's why the country at the ballot box made the changes that they made. They took the House out of Democratic hands and made Republicans lead the House of Representatives. And then they did the same with the Senate and the White House in 2024. That is the report card that the Democratic Party earned, because they prioritized the things that the American people did not want prioritized. They haven't read the room. They answer to their woke and angry mobs that they are, foisting on members of Congress and people all over the country right now. It's a very coordinated effort. They deny it, but make no mistake, every U.S. senator today released a video that has the exact same script. It is very clearly a theatrical performance that the American people are seeing out of Democrats in the U.S. Senate. We're here with solutions to problems created by the last administration. We're putting it forward to get the job done. We have a timeline that we have to focus on, and that's why these CRAs are so important for us to tackle right now. We have limited legislative days in order to roll back these unnecessary, burdensome regulations that no one asked for and no one wanted. And we're getting the job done that we were sent here to do. And But let's look again at the numbers. The Biden administration has issued at least 31 regulations for residential and commercial appliances and equipment, totaling $60 billion. If my friends on the other side of the aisle don't think that added regulatory costs filter in the price of new appliances, then we have several bridges available for them to purchase. Let's look further at some of the regulations that will reap American consumers in terms of financial savings. In one example, under the Biden DOE's dishwasher efficiency standards, Americans are expected to save a whopping $1.12 under that regulation. Was that necessary to put out there? Of course it wasn't. These are savings that the left expected the American people to be excited about as they racked up more regulations and more restrictions that cost us jobs from the results of the Biden years. And under the latest DOE rule that HJ Res 42 would fortunately curb, home appliance manufacturers have already outlined how the rule requires their industry to provide a myriad of unnecessary information and data that is meaningless when demonstrated efficiency, but simply is required to meet compliance with the rules. It's regulations for the sake of regulations, and the American people are left to pay higher prices and fewer choices. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues simply refuse to acknowledge the natural dynamics of the marketplace. When left to their own devices, the American people will seek out the most efficient model of an appliance that they can afford. And I agree with my colleagues when they say that the American people want cost savings, both at sale and efficiency over the lifestyle of an appliance. But what they don't want is government intervention that limits their ability to make those choices themselves. They want to have more affordable options available to fit tighter budgets, not fewer, more expensive choices, because unelected bureaucrats at Biden's DOE needed to micromanage what refrigerators, dishwashers, heaters, air conditioners, you name it, are permissible under unrealistic efficiency standards. HJ Res 42 will help curb these costly, limiting, and anti-natural gas standards from the final days of the gasping Biden administration that were finalized at the behest of his radical climate lobby. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserved. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. We've heard a lot about so-called theatrical performances. I didn't realize that asking the simple question of whether or not the gentleman had held a town hall this year counts as theater. I understand it's a forbidden question in the House Republican Conference now as to whether or not one has held a town hall for obvious reasons. So, but my constituents certainly don't find that to be an offensive question. We've held 5 town halls in the last 2 months. We look forward to holding more because we're going to be responsive to the American people. I wish my colleagues would do the same. But look, what I won't do, and I think what the American people won't do, is be lectured by Republicans about rising costs when literally as we speak, Trump's tariffs are taking hold and beginning the process of increasing prices, which already started 30 days ago, and putting it into overdrive. These are just a couple of headlines from the last 8 hours. New England, New York grid operators prepare to collect millions in tariffs on Canadian electricity. New York Post, car prices could potentially surge by $12,000 because of these tariffs. House Republicans have the audacity to lecture us about increased costs when they are increasing the costs of everything? And by the way, this is not some foreign debate. I represent Colorado, proud to represent the great state of Colorado. I've never been to the gentleman's district in upstate New York, but my understanding is it's pretty close to the Canadian border. Billions of dollars of economic development in New York, of commerce that's transacted between Canada and the United States. What, a mere few miles from the gentleman's district? And he describes this as theater? I'm not so sure that the folks in his district, that the people of New York will feel that way as these tariffs begin to kick in. I'm sure that the farmers and the ranchers in Colorado that I represent I can assure you they won't call it theater. Mr. Speaker, I understand that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would like to spend every second of every minute of every day talking about the prior president. It's been a half hour now of my colleague on the other side of the aisle. Every sentence starts and ends with Joe Biden by my colleague. Donald Trump is the president of the United States. My colleague reminds us, yes, Republicans have a majority in the House and in the Senate. And all I'm suggesting is that maybe they should use that majority to do better things than waste everyone's time on labeling requirements for pool heaters. That's it. That maybe we ought to be a little bit more concerned with the 401ks of our constituents, of working families in Buffalo and in Fort Collins, Colorado. I don't think that's too much to ask. I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
The epiphany, Mr. Speaker, that those on the other side of the aisle now have, and they're so concerned about costs and economic concerns, when they fought us tooth and nail on every single action that we tried to take to curb the Biden administration's uncontrollable regulatory environment, is just laughable. I mean, we watched, we warned, and we fought in the 118th Congress to stop an administration that created a regulatory environment that has added about $1.5 trillion in needless regulations that has stifled the growth of industries and jobs in this country. And now you're seeing them all of a sudden change their tune. And as our new administration is less than a month and a half old, things are moving in the right direction. People are having a new view of what the future is. We are fighting hard to preserve a predictable, tax code in this country, extending the current tax code so that we can have regulatory certainty, tax certainty, so that businesses can thrive and grow and not fear the hammer of government that they did under the Biden years. I mean, there was an explosion after Election Day of people ready, willing, and able to invest in America. We have seen unprecedented investment come in from overseas, bringing new jobs, new opportunities, and new future creation here to the United States since Election Day. And that will continue because that is what President Trump campaigned on. That is what House Republicans fight for and what we will achieve together. I mean, this epiphany that we've had on the other side of the aisle, that they are now all of a sudden concerned with the costs of everyday Americans. They were nowhere to be found for 2 years in the 118th Congress as we fought every day about the cost of gas and groceries and how it was pinching away because of Biden's inflation and what it had done to the purchasing power of everyday Americans' accounts. People in probably both of our districts said the same exact thing, that they were watching the American dream slip away from our kids and our grandkids because we couldn't necessarily be certain that the future would be brighter under the current trajectory of this country. And we've saddled the country with $36.5 trillion in debt, a debt service that is higher than what we spend on our national defense. It's an unacceptable legacy that we're leaving to our future generations. And we are working every day towards our budget reconciliation to get that under control so that we can be the era that bent the curve on spending and got this country back on track. Yet we have people on the other side of the aisle that want to keep spending levels at the COVID era. COVID, fell upon us 5 years ago this week. Yet they want to still spend like we're in the midst of an emergency. And it is time that we have a common sense revolution in this country. Common sense like what we're doing here today, rolling back needless regulations that hurt jobs, that hurt workers, and hurt consumers. That's what we were asked to do by our constituents. This takes choice. These CRAs this week are important because they reinstitute choice in the marketplace. They take the bureaucrats that DOGE is fighting every single day out of the equation and put the American consumer back in the driver's seat so that we can have choice in our consumer goods, not creating a standard just to justify someone's job in a cubicle somewhere. That's what this government's been about for far too long, but those days are over. We're now putting common sense in the driver's seat in this country. We're working towards a brighter future for our kids and our grandkids, and I'm prepared to close, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. Look, as expected, a rebuttal replete with references to the 118th Congress and what Democrats did in the last Congress and assigning blame and all the rest. I would just remind my colleague, you are in charge. You have the majority. You have the ability to shape events. You have a Republican president and a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate. I can certainly assure you that my constituents who are seeing their 401k balances vanish in real time would not describe your policies as common sense. Stock market tanking, prices of fuel going up, prices of food going up, prices of cars, vehicles going up, car insurance, home insurance, you name it. Under Trump's economy, everything goes up. And by the way, he's unabashed about it. I mean, I watched some of his press conference yesterday. He's not hiding it. He's acknowledged it. He has said outright, I know these tariffs will increase prices in the short term, according to him. And he expects the Republican caucus to defend him, tooth and nail, as these prices go up. The gentleman talks about economic growth. The Federal Reserve, the Atlanta branch, yesterday, just yesterday, forecasted negative GDP growth for this quarter. First time in a long time, negative GDP growth under President Trump. This is the common sense agenda that my colleague from New York sells to farmers and ranchers in Colorado? We're not buying it. The American people aren't buying it. It's why I would implore every member of this body to oppose this rule. And Mr. Speaker, it's also why I would implore everyone to support the amendment to the rule that we would like to pursue by bringing up H.R. 1637, the Protect Veteran Jobs Act, which was brought up previously. And I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, to insert the text of my amendment into the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I am prepared to close, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I'll direct my comments to the chair, to you, Mr. Speaker, to express my frustration, which is the frustration felt by so many of the hardworking people of the great state of Colorado that I have the privilege of representing in the House of Representatives. It is a frustration born from the realities that they are facing each and every day. As I mentioned, an economy that's in free fall, a stock market that is tanking, seeing their neighbors, their friends, public servants being purged from federal agencies, hardworking civil servants who do wildfire mitigation work in Colorado and across the Rocky Mountain West, unceremoniously fired, scientists at the NOAA and NWS facilities in Boulder and elsewhere being subject to these mass terminations, a federal executive who seems intent on dismantling agency after agency, and a House Republican caucus
that is walking with him lockstep every step of the way as they prepare to slash Medicaid to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars. The frustration that my constituents feel is justified because notwithstanding every single one of those transgressions, every single one of those challenges, those obstacles that Republicans have manufactured and created in their daily lives, if they tune into this debate, they will see that the focus is on none of it, and instead on the matters that we've discussed today. My constituents, Mr. Speaker, do not want to see me debating labeling requirements for pool heaters. They don't. I won't speak for what the people of New York have to say about their representatives. I will just say for Colorado and Coloradans, they expect me to be here pursuing policies that will make their lives easier, that will promote economic growth and a better quality of life. And they're not getting it from this House under Republican control. That I can assure you. I understand House Republicans, I'm sure, will pass the rule. They'll get their bill on water heaters and pool heaters and air conditioners passed through the House. They'll have a big fancy signing ceremony at the White House where they'll celebrate the fact that they repealed a labeling requirement rule that was promulgated a year ago. I fear for what the broader economic trends will be when they have that signing ceremony. Who knows? But if past is prologue, reasonably confident that the economy will continue the free fall unless Republicans work with us as Democrats in good faith to pursue policies that would advance opportunity in our country. That's my humble request, Mr. Speaker, and the best way to get started is by opposing the previous question, opposing the rule, opposing the underlying bills, and getting back to the business of this House. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am prepared to close and yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
For 4 years, Democrats gaslit the American people in a vain attempt to convince them that costs weren't going up, inflation wasn't real, our economy wasn't in trouble, and there wasn't a crisis at our borders. The American people saw past that deception and they voted for a president and a Congress that promised to put our country back on track. Part of fulfilling that promise includes unwinding a slew of burdensome rules, prohibitions, restrictions, and other ticky-tacky attempts to micromanage everyday life for Americans. It also includes ensuring that the woke mob and their radical environmental NGOs can no longer call the shots at these federal agencies at the expense of our domestic manufacturers, our domestic energy producers, and good-paying jobs. I strongly support the rule before us today, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question of the resolution.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess subject to the call.
Thank you very much. Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member, Chairman Cole, for being here for your testimony. Appreciate it. I will just say, neither here nor there, but I think it's a bit rich for folks to lecture us about votes on the CR when, I don't know, 30, 40 members of your caucus voted against the CR in December, including a near majority of the Republicans in the Rules Committee. I understand people have different intellectual rationales and reasons for their votes on these bills, but it's a little rich to endure the lecture like we just endured from one of our new colleagues who perhaps wasn't aware. I don't know if he was here in December, but wasn't aware that so many of his own colleagues on his side of the aisle voted against the CR, but I digress. I want to ask you, Mr. Chairman, a couple of questions, and I missed the debate earlier, so just want to kind of level set that I'm understanding this CR correctly. The CR increases defense spending by $6 billion, that's right?
No. It increases by about 2.5.
$2.5 billion?
Correct.
Okay. And it cuts funding for non-defense programs and services by 13?
Not for programs, for actually by, all the cuts are largely, and I do not enjoy saying this because I believe in them, but they're congressional projects. They're not programmatic funding.
I'm just trying to do a level set.
Yeah,
I'm trying to understand, and I think for folks who are paying attention.
Realize where the cuts were coming from.
So whatever you want to call it,
okay.
Non-defense programs, non-defense
correct
spending is cut by roughly $13 billion.
Correct.
The CR does not include the $22.8 billion in FY26 advanced funding for the Toxic Exposure Fund.
That's correct. We think that should be dealt with in the 26 bill.
Got it, but it's not included in this bill.
That's correct.
Okay. You mentioned in your colloquy with my colleague on the Republican side what's changed since December. I think he posed that question to you. What makes this CR different than the last? And we've gone through a couple of ways in which it is materially different. But of course, what also has changed, as you well know, are the serious concerns that members on my side of the aisle, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, some members on your side of the aisle, regarding the dismantling of federal agencies that the Trump administration has been engaged in and the purge of the federal workforce. And I take it you are concerned about some of that? Is that fair to say?
No, I'm not concerned, not in this bill. When I have concerns, I express my concerns.
Are you concerned about DOJ's activities more broadly?
I'm sorry?
Are you concerned about DOJ's activities more broadly?
No, I'm really not.
You're not concerned?
If I can answer the question.
Sure.
No, I mean, because I think most of these things will be reviewed by cabinet agencies and will be looked at. And I think a lot of this needed to be, honestly, a light shown. And I think Mr. Norman actually listed a number of things.
Here's why I ask, just simply.
Okay.
You were singing a very different tune a few days ago when DOJ announced that they apparently were shutting down multiple federal installations in your district.
Correct.
Shutting down the Office of Social Security, shutting down the National Weather Service,
Correct.
Shutting down the Indian Tribal Health Service.
Not in my district, but immediately outside.
In the state of Oklahoma, correct.
Correct.
And you were apparently very concerned about DOJ's activities in that regard, so concerned that you, according to what you tweeted out earlier this week, that you engaged the administration
I did.
with your concerns. That sounds very different than what you said a moment ago, that you have no concerns, that you're just, this is just a spotlight, and that DOJ is doing important work. But of course, that doesn't apply when they're trying to shut down the Social Security office in your district, right?
Correct. If I think they're right, look, when I was chairman of Labor H, we shut down a Job Corps center in my district.
Sure.
I'm the chairman.
So which Social Security
offices? I could pretty
offices,
easily stop that.
Which Social Security offices
can I
should they shut
finish
down?
my answer?
Sure.
In that case, I thought it was the right thing to do.
Got it.
I didn't like it. I'm a Job Corps supporter.
I appreciate that.
But that had underperformed for a lot of years. Now, at the end of the day, again, I think members, are free to advocate for what they believe, free to intervene, free to point out when somebody's wrong.
So I'm
those
excited
cases,
for
I
you.
thought they were wrong, and I thought I was doing my job.
I'm excited for you, Mr. Chairman, and the people of Oklahoma that you convinced Elon Musk to not shut down the Social Security office in your district. Which Social Security offices should be shut down? Because apparently they've published a list. Mr. Let me finish, Brian. I gave you the courtesy.
There was one target
I'll give you
in
the
my
courtesy. Let me finish my statement.
Sure.
They have published a list, at least as of last week, of 47 different offices, Social Security offices across the country that they intended to shut down. You have succeeded, and I look forward to hearing more about your advocacy in this regard, in saving the Social Security office in your district. And I'm just simply asking, should that same courtesy extend to your colleagues from Indiana and from Georgia and from Texas who sit on the dais? Why is that office any better than my colleagues, the Republican colleagues on this committee who have offices in their districts?
If you contact and make your case, then it shouldn't.
Who'd you contact?
I contacted the relevant departments,
Did
actually.
did you talk to Mr. Musk? Who'd you talk to at
We
DOGE?
visited with DOGE representatives as well.
Did that include Mr. Musk? I'm just curious.
No, not one-on-one.
What does that mean, not one-on-one?
No, I did not talk
Okay,
to
all
him.
right, I'm just
I talked
curious.
to the staff over there. at
I mean,
DOGE.
maybe we can publish a guide for every member of Congress about what 24-year-old DOGE staffer members should call to save the Social Security office in their district the way that Chairman Cole did. That might be something that would be of benefit, I think, to millions of Americans and their elected representatives here in Washington. You get my point, Mr. Cole. This is no way to run a federal government. In my view, it should not be simply by virtue of your stature and your position in the Republican Party that you're able to convince these folks that your office, this division, should be saved within your district. And Americans in all these other states.
The National Weather Center, there's only one of them. It's not hard to save it because its mission is pretty critical.
There are plenty of installations, there are plenty of facilities across the country that are either one or two or three that are not, we're not talking about wide swaths, that ultimately are on the chopping block. And I'm just simply suggesting to you, and I find it hard to believe that you wouldn't agree with me on this point, that this is no way to run the federal government, that essentially we should allow the administration to unilaterally dismantle different agencies, mass closures, mass purges, and then leave it to Republican members of Congress to ultimately call in and ask for a favor, ask for a waiver, and hopefully pull it off for their constituents.
I made my case.
Well, in any event, if that is the new way in which the federal government will operate,
Nothing
I
new
fear
about
for
it.
the precedent
You
it
haven't
sets
been
for
here
future
during
years,
a
but
BRAC
I'll digress.
process or something like that. That happens all the time. Things get closed.
I digress.
People agree or disagree.
I'm going to, I know the ranking member sounded like she wanted to expound upon that. I don't know if she would care to respond, but.
You know, when we talk about that we didn't do anything with police in the District of Columbia, we did. That is clear, that there is the $1.1 billion cuts police, fire, AMT services, etc. I was just fascinated all of a sudden that one satellite weather service, I believe if you take a look at Project 2025, it calls for the elimination of NOAA. And the fact is they're moving to the elimination of NOAA, which would gives us the information that comes from the weather satellites so that we know what to do. I just want to make this, this point. It's true. People, and what I said earlier, and Mr. Neguse, you were not here, and I'll deal with the Army Corps projects cut by $1.4 billion. And now with this one-year CR, we put those projects, where they go, how much funding they get, into the hands of Musk and Trump, President Trump, I don't want to be disrespectful, and Russ Vought. What funding is there? So if you happen to be high on the pecking order, you can call and say, whoa, my project needs to get done. My project needs to get done. This one needs to get done, depending on where you are in the pecking order of this body or this institution, okay? However, it's no longer in the prerogative of all of us making a determination. Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, making the determination of that level of funding and which projects get funded. It's in our hands. And that's what we're talking about, is giving all of that up. Giving that up. Why? I don't get it. One more final comment. Look, I say to my Republican colleagues, if you want to send legislative proposals to the Congress for deliberation, go ahead. Then members can vote whether they want to shutter offices or they want to cut funding. It is really unlawful to do this unilaterally. And that is what is happening here. That is what Musk and President Trump are doing. It is unilateral. We should be so strong to stand up and say no. No. And in terms of shutting the government down, if you don't want to negotiate, if the speaker says, no, it's this way or the highway, then that makes it where the shutdown decision is made, not on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with the ranking member, and I would just simply say we live in a constitutional republic in which the American people elect representatives to this body to make decisions with respect to funding the government. And the notion that now members are left to petition unnamed new special government employees in a new Department of Governmental Efficiency to decide whether or not a Social Security office is going to stay open in their district, to decide whether or not the National Weather Service, which has a facility in my district, whether NOAA, which has a large facility in my district, will be on the chopping block. That is not, in my view, consistent with, of course, past precedent, but fundamentally the spirit of the Constitution and the separation of powers. And I think it's unfortunate and deeply disheartening that so many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I think, have taken what is very clearly a short-sighted view, and this assumption that their majorities and the political wins being what they are, that will last forever. And there won't come a day in which there is a Democratic president and a Democratic House or a Democratic Senate, and you will be living under the precedent that you have tragically created. There's still time, in my view, to pull back. The time for doing that would be now. But in the meantime, I know there are a few offices. I was just reading this a moment ago, and looks like in Elizabeth City, Franklin, Greenville, and Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, 4 Social Security offices closing. So, maybe Chairman Cole, you can give us the 20-year-old DOJ staffer that you talked to, give us their contact information, so perhaps the chairwoman can call them and petition President Trump to save those 4 offices among the other 47 Social Security offices that are being dismantled across the country. I yield back.
It's now my honor to introduce Joe Neguse, who has done a fantastic job as Assistant Democratic Leader.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Chair Aguilar, Vice Chair Liu for convening us for the important conversations that will ensue over the next 2 days, and of course to Leader Jeffries, Whip Clark, and Chairwoman Del Bene for their incredible leadership over the course of these last several years. There's a headline that I came across this morning that I think so well encapsulates the chaos and the dysfunction that we are living through and the precarious moment that we find ourselves in. From CBS News, and the headline is this: Lutnick says Trump's policies are, quote, worth it, even if they lead to a recession. The Lutnick, of course, that this article is referring to is President Trump's Commerce Secretary. Think about that for a second. That in his view, these reckless economic policies are worth it, even if they cause a recession. And it appears they will get their wish. As you heard Vice Chair Liu, Chair Aguilar, Leader Jeffries, Whip Clark, Chairwoman Del Bene describe the economic havoc that President Trump and his administration have created over just the course of these last 7 weeks. Stock market crashing, job losses piling up, 401ks vanishing, the prices for everyday goods going up across the board. Federal workers, folks at the Forest Service, wildland firefighters in my district back home in Colorado, purged from the federal government, agencies being dismantled. All of this has real-world consequences for the people that we are also privileged to serve here in the United States Congress. The time for the Trump administration to abandon these reckless policies is now. They warrant a decisive, comprehensive response from House Democrats, which is precisely what we've done for the better part of the last 7 weeks, and we look forward to having more discussions on our response in the days ahead.
With that, I will now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Neguse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to read just 2 brief excerpts from 2 different articles in the last 2 weeks. One is from the Star Tribune. Superior National Forest staff deficit worsens. An agency employee in Minnesota who requested an anonymity out of fear of retribution said the cuts and fallout have SNF, Superior National Forest staff, in crisis mode. Other forest colleagues are worried that they'll lose their jobs, and some career employees feel pressure to resign or risk losing benefits, the worker added. We were already hanging on by a thread the person added. Now, Musk, Trump, and Doge are thinning us even further. This is huge for the boundary waters, recreation, and timber and fire management. It's another article. Headline: There is literally no one. The fallout coming to Lake Tahoe after Forest Service gut it. This is from the San Francisco Gate newspaper. Mr. Chairman, across the country, Forest Service employees, Department of Interior employees, civil servants at the Bureau of Land Management are losing their jobs. They're being purged from the federal government. In many of your districts, as is the case in mine, timber management, wildfire management, wildfire mitigation, watershed protection, all of it put at risk. And while I have great respect for my colleague from Arizona, and we work closely together on a number of different matters, I have to be candid that I am disappointed that this subcommittee has not even entertained the idea of convening on any of the matters that I just described. I understand this is a priority for my Republican colleagues. I understand this bill that you've proposed that directs, I guess, and my sense is, it essentially tells the Forest Service and the Department of Interior that they can't impede any efforts of DHS. Of course, it seems like that could be achieved by a phone call, right? I mean, you could call Secretary Burgum at the Department of Interior and say to him, hey, you know, it'd be helpful if you didn't impede any of the efforts of Secretary Noem at the Department of Homeland Security. I'm not really understanding why it requires a federal law and the expenditure of our time here today when in every single one of your districts, Forest Service employees are being fired as we speak. Does not make sense to me. The priorities of this committee, as is the case with the priorities of the majority, are out of step with the facts on the ground. And, Chairman, you know me to not be, I think at least, a particularly partisan person. We have run this, we've worked together for years on this particular subcommittee, considering bipartisan legislation. It's the most productive subcommittee, at least it was, in the United States Congress. Hundreds of bills by members on both sides of the aisle that are largely supported on a unanimous basis. So it pains me to lay bare my fears in this regard, but I have to do that because when I go back home to my district at the end of the week, I can promise you they're not going to ask me about this bill. What they are going to ask me about are the wildfire mitigation projects in the national forests that I have the privilege of representing that are now in jeopardy because the Trump administration has decided to gut the federal workforce. And they will ask why, as the ranking member of the Federal Lands Subcommittee, we haven't taken that up. And I will tell them, well, it's because this week, Republicans decided that rather than telling Secretary Burgum to work with the Department of Homeland Security, they'd pass a federal law to force him to do it. That's your prerogative. You choose the agenda here. But make no mistake, I don't think the American people are going to be supportive. And with that, I yield back. I thank the chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses. I have the privilege of representing Colorado in the Congress, and so I want to say to Mr. Romero, welcome to Washington, and thank you for being here. Mr. Gingrich, I wasn't planning on talking about impeachment, but I just have to spend a minute on it, given the statement you made just a minute ago. I think you said, if I'm not mistaken, you said the two impeachments against President Trump were repudiated in the Senate. Is that the right word you used? Yeah, okay. And would you describe the impeachment that you initiated against President Clinton 35 some odd years ago and the Senate's reaction to that impeachment in the same way?
Well, it failed.
which is part of why Jefferson thought impeachment was not a realistic possibility.
Well, I would just simply suggest to you that, because I served as an impeachment manager in the second impeachment trial against President Trump following the attack on our nation's capital. And in that impeachment, as you well know, of all the presidential impeachments, which I suspect you've studied, 7 Republican senators did something that no senators had done in the history of our republic, which is voted to convict a president of their own political party. So I think that is a far cry from repudiation. I understand that it didn't meet the constitutional threshold for success. I,
Actually,
of course,
President
recognize
Johnson
that.
had the same experience in, I believe, 1868.
I will just, again, simply say to you that unlike the impeachment, no, one that's inaccurate, Republican senators, with respect to the impeachment trial of 1868 against President Johnson, that is not accurate. It's the first time in American history in which senators of an opposing political party voted to convict a president, but of their same party, but I digress. Want to talk to you about a phrase you used. I think this is accurate. You called it a judicial coup d'etat. Is that, am I right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you would describe, 14 federal judges appointed by a president of an opposing political party issuing nationwide injunctions against a president's executive orders as a judicial coup d'etat.
I would describe the wave of decisions in the last 7 weeks deliberately designed to slow down, unwind, and block the president as clearly an effort by a group of judges.
I hear you. What I'm asking you, again, I don't think I'm mischaracterizing your testimony. 14 federal judges, all of an opposing political party, that is to say, 14 federal judges appointed by a president of an opposing political party, issuing nationwide injunctions against the president's policies, in your view, would be a judicial coup d'etat.
It depends on how long the time was.
Sounds like it depends on the president,
injunction.
Mr. Gingrich, because the president I'm describing is President Biden.
I know.
During his tenure, 14 federal judges issued injunctions against policies that he pursued via executive order. How many of them were appointed by Republican presidents? Do you know?
No.
100%, all of them.
Well, you're making my case.
I'm making your case. What's fascinating, Mr. Gingrich, is I didn't hear much from you about judicial coup d'etats when President Biden's policies were being rejected by federal judges across the country. It is very convenient now.
No.
Lo and behold, that you take great issue and you describe it as a judicial coup d'etat when I didn't hear these words 2 years ago.
Had the Judiciary Committee invited me in during the Biden administration,
I
would have been glad to say.
Well, I regret that Chairman Jordan.
I don't approve of.
I regret that Chairman Jordan didn't issue an invitation to you when, as Mr. Massey articulated, policy after policy, executive order after executive order issued by President Biden were being rejected by federal courts, subject to nationwide injunctions across the land. Apparently, you were just waiting to come testify in front of the committee to call that a judicial coup d'etat against President Biden. That's what it sounds like.
That's why I believe any kind of nationwide injunction should immediately go to the Supreme Court to be validated as a nationwide activity.
Well, I
don't believe district judges
I understand
have the
that
authority.
alternative. I understand that you've provided that particular alternative as something for this committee to consider. Your written testimony indicates far more significant and structural changes. You referenced the Judiciary Act of 1802 and this notion that the Congress can abolish district courts and the rest, and you seem to be suggesting those as remedies that we ought to consider. In any event, I just want to talk, I know I'll ask the chairman to indulge me since I know he's indulged other members. You have talked about, and I'll just read it from an article here, there's a long tradition which has only been broken really starting in the late 1950s with this crazy idea that lawyers and judges are superior to the rest of us and they get to define everything, right?
That's correct.
And you're referencing what case?
Cooper versus Aaron.
Cooper versus Aaron. That case was a desegregation case, right?
Yeah, but that wasn't the point of it.
I understand, but this was a case in which the state of Arkansas was seeking the ability to not comply with Brown versus Board of Education in desegregating schools in Arkansas. It had nothing to do, by the way, Speaker Gingrich, with presidential power. It had to do with the supremacy of the Constitution and the ability of states to respect the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution. There are a variety of cases long before Cooper in which the Supreme Court
has opined on the constitutionality of a president's actions, Youngstown being a great example. It is convenient that for whatever reason you've landed on these 1950s desegregation cases as the inception, in your view, of the Supreme Court's tyranny, as you describe it, I suppose. I don't think that that's consistent with the values of the American people. It's the reason why Republican jurists, Michael Mukasey, a very distinguished federal jurist, as you know, has attacked your ideas in the past. I think you'd concede that. I yield back.
If continued indulgence, I would let the speaker finish.
All I will say is the reference to that is from a book by a liberal lawyer who said specifically that it's Cooper versus Aaron, where, with no reference to the case, the Supreme Court decides to issue a statement that it is clear that we are supreme. And they're not talking about we're supreme over Arkansas. We are the supreme deciders. And that is explicitly false and historically wrong. And it's what Jefferson was so furious about in 1800 because he did not believe judges had the ability to overrule the American people.
I thank the gentleman.
I want to thank the ranking member for his leadership, and I want to echo his remarks. It is difficult to listen to this debate, to hear the arguments peddled by my colleagues that are hypocritical at best and intellectually dishonest at worst. Where were my colleagues when 14 federal judges appointed by Republican presidents issued injunctions against policies that the Biden administration was pursuing over the course of the last 4 years? Where were you? Nowhere to be found. I don't remember my colleagues bringing this bill to the floor. Of course not. Spare me your feigned indignation. They talk of defending the Constitution when President Trump is running roughshod over provision after provision. They talk of judicial overreach as they attack judges across the country. Read the Constitution. Read the Federalist Papers. Read about the importance that our framers and founders placed on judicial independence, and reflect on what your conduct will do to the administration of justice in the United States of America, to the rule of law that has been sacrosanct for the better part of 2.5 centuries. I cannot believe, I suppose I should, but I cannot believe that my colleagues would waste time on a bill like this, a dangerous bill, instead of addressing the consequential challenges that our country faces. I would urge every colleague of mine, vote no on this bill. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the chairman. I thank the ranking member for the amendment. I think it's a reasonable amendment, and I would relish the opportunity to debate the amendment with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I am very confused by the strategy that they seem to have adopted, and I guess I just wanted to test it for myself, because as I walked in here, one of my colleagues said, no, if you offer to debate them in any way on any subject, they'll refuse to engage with you. They won't respond, that there's some sort of, I don't know, tactic that they've adopted. And I said, there's just no way that that's true. So, because I, of course, serve with Mr. Roy, for example, on the Rules Committee, and we engage in fulsome debate on that committee. And I just can't believe that this would be a tactic he, of all people, my friend from Texas, would adopt. Mr. Roy, seriously? Is it, you won't respond? We can't have any conversation? Well, I'm glad to be here. I'm delighted. Would you be willing to debate this particular amendment with me? Because I'd be interested in your thoughts. What was that? What was that? What was that? No, I know. I'm offering you the opportunity. I assume you're against this amendment, and I just wonder if you might engage with me for a few moments on why. Nothing? Mr. Roy, come on. Because here's the thing. I know for a fact you disagree with this strategy. Like, I don't know what Chairman Jordan said to all of you to compel you to say, we're just getting this gag order. You're not allowed to talk for 24 hours. I mean, it is insanity. This is not elementary school. What are we doing? Mr. Tiffany, we served together on the Public Lands Subcommittee. You're the chairman. We had a fulsome hearing yesterday, hours of debate. Do you have any comments on this amendment? I assume you have a position on it? I would yield. What was that? I don't know if the cameras could capture it. I think some sort of gesture. I cannot believe that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have debased themselves in this way. I mean, this committee has long been known as a committee that engages in rigorous and robust debate. Mr. Chairman, could I indulge you? Would you be willing to just debate with me for a moment on this amendment? Nothing? This is probably the only time in the 7 years I've been in Congress that Chairman Jordan has refused to make a comment.
No, let me do that.
Really? I'm happy to yield a moment to you. Do you support this amendment that Mr. Raskin has offered?
The simple and straightforward amendment for the.
What was that? It's a simple and straightforward amendment, exactly?
That's what every amendment, I think.
No, but this one is a particularly simple and straightforward. I mean, look, here's the thing. This amendment, very simple, very straightforward. All it says is that the grants that the Department of Justice has allocated pursuant to the authority that we have given that department for police departments in Ohio, in the chairman's state, that those grants be held harmless. That these grants that DOJ had managed to cut to local police departments, that they be reinstated. That's it. That's all this amendment does. Nothing else.
Will the gentleman yield for a minute?
To one of my Republican colleagues, or is it?
No, sorry.
Oh, on the yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
sorry.
There's not a single Republican colleague of mine that will engage in any way. Again, I just think it falls short of the standards of this august body and this committee. And Mr. Chairman, I get it. I know you want this hearing to end early. I understand. But why not live up to the values of this committee and the expectations of this committee, and let's have a healthy exchange of views back and forth, and we can then let the chips fall where they might. So I'll give you one last opportunity. On this one, you must, come on.
You're a kind man.
Well, I'll yield to my colleague from.
Well, I was just going to suggest that we see if Mr. Van Drew is back there. He's been chomping at the bit to say something. I don't think he's ever spent this many hours without speaking. So I don't know if he's back in the anteroom over there, but certainly that might be your best bet.
Yeah, I think he's in hiding, and it's consistent with the approach that my colleagues have regretfully taken over the course of the last couple of weeks. Most of them not holding town halls. Constituents can't find them, and lo and behold, now here in the committee, where we're supposed to be debating these kinds of amendments, and aren't willing to say a word. And we've been here before. I mean, we had the reconciliation debate, of course, when Democrats were in the majority. I served on this committee, and we had a debate. There was never an order from the chairman to say you're not allowed to say a single word for 24 hours. That was never an edict that came down from Chairman Nadler. I don't recall that. So anyway, I see I'm out of time.
Certainly not.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady.
Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your courtesy, and thank you, Ms. Hageman and Ms. Hoyle, for being here and for your testimony. I appreciate you all coming before the Rules Committee. Ms. Hageman, I thought I want to perhaps spend a bit of time unpacking some of the conversation you just had with Mr. Norman. We both represent Western states, Rocky Mountain West, of course, from congressional neighbors, if you will. I represent northwestern Colorado, as you know, a long border with Wyoming. And I understand that you held a town hall pretty recently in Wyoming. I don't know if
10 of them.
What was that?
10.
10 of them.
Town halls.
So I am curious, so you've held a lot of them, way more than a lot of your colleagues on that side of the aisle, I will say. So I appreciate that. I've held 10 as well, my district. But I'm wondering, what are you hearing at those town halls? What do folks, just give us a sense of the flavor of what folks are concerned about in the state of Wyoming.
They're concerned about energy production, making sure that we get back to energy independence, which is part of the reason why I think it's so important to rename this to Gulf of America in light of the amount of production. It accounts for about 15% of our oil and gas production in the country. So that's one of the big issues that you hear wherever you go, whether you're in town halls or meetings, is the importance of protecting our energy industry. I hear a lot about ensuring that we are implementing the agenda and the policies that Donald Trump ran on.
Okay.
This being one of them. I think people are,
So wait,
again,
can
I think people
Can I just
again-
ask you a question on that? Let me just make sure because I understood the first part. You said energy dominance, protecting the energy industry is something you hear from folks that you represent in Wyoming, and I appreciate that. And then you said implementing President Trump's policies. So you're saying that there are people at your town halls who are demanding that you rename the Gulf of Mexico?
I think it's across the entire board.
Has that come up at any of your town halls?
Actually, it has.
It has?
Yes, and it's also come up in the
The
meetings that
people
I've
of
had with
Wyoming
people.
were demanding that you rename the Gulf of Mexico?
See, you use the word demand.
Oh,
Very
asking.
few people come to me and
Imploring.
demand anything.
Well, I guess
What people say is that they want us to implement the agenda that Donald Trump
that
ran on.
includes
And this is
renaming the
one
Gulf of
them,
Mexico?
Because it has to do with pride in America
I-
and what America stands
Representative,
for.
I would
So-
just simply say,
Well, you can argue with me as
I'm
much
not, it's
as
not
you'd
about an
like
argument.
to.
I would love to attend one of the,
I would
guess
welcome you to attend one
I
of
am
my town
asking you an
halls.
honest question, and you're welcome to answer it any way you'd like. You're telling me and this committee that at one of your town halls,
I
and
have said at my
let me
town
finish,
halls
let me
and
finish my
meetings,
question.
At
You'll have
town
an
halls and my meetings.
You'll have an opportunity to answer. Let me
Okay.
finish my question. You've held 10 town halls
Yes.
across Wyoming.
Yes.
And at those town halls, Wyoming residents, constituents have said to you, I would like you to rename the Gulf of Mexico. Has that happened?
Yes.
That has happened?
At the meetings that I have held, as I have said to you repeatedly now, I not only am holding town halls, I'm holding meetings with my constituents.
Sure.
The entire agenda that President Trump ran on, they've talked to me about no taxes on tips.
That's not,
They
I'm
have
not
talked
asking
to
you about no
me-
taxes
they
on
have talked
tips.
to me. They have
That's not
talked to
the
me
bill that
about
you're here testifying
renaming
about.
the Gulf
The
of
bill-
America. They have talked to me about the oil and gas development
Well,
that we have down there.
I
They have
think
talked
it's a
about
shame.
exporting energy out of the
I'll
Gulf
reclaim
of
my time
America.
because I think it's a shame. And I would.
So you're calling me, I think what you're saying is you don't believe what I'm saying.
I'm saying that I would love to come to a town hall, and so I'll certainly look forward to, what we may do is, we may just consider doing a town hall in Wyoming myself so that I can get a better sense from Republicans, Democrats,
You're welcome.
unaffiliated people of Wyoming as to what their priorities are. My sense is, I'm not disagreeing with you that there are many folks in Wyoming who believe that the Congress ought to be pursuing policies that President Trump supports. What I am suggesting is that I find it a little bit unbelievable that of all the issues that the American people are dealing with, that my constituents are dealing with, that your constituents are dealing with, that at these town halls, renaming the Gulf of Mexico was a top priority. I suspect that
One
the
of
people
the-
of your
one of
state,
the things
I'm
that
not
you're
done
ignoring-
talking, you'll have an opportunity to respond. I don't believe that the people in your state, nor the people in mine, would identify renaming the Gulf of Mexico as their top priority. And I find it absurd that we have to engage in this discussion to act as though this is anything but abnormal, that this is sort of just regular order, that yes, in the first 4 months of the 119th Congress, the Republican majority has decided that this is so important that we ought to take floor time to rename the Gulf of Mexico, notwithstanding all of the other policies that I suspect many of your supporters, many of the citizens that you represent are passionate about. I find that hard to believe. And apparently I'm the only one, or at least you and I disagree about this, but I suspect my colleagues maybe on this side of the aisle concur in that assessment. But in any event, I am happy to give you an opportunity to respond. And
So one of the things, Mr. Neguse, that you are ignoring is the fact that the state of Wyoming and my constituents in Wyoming have a very close connection to the Gulf of America because we are one of the largest energy producers in the nation. We are the largest coal producer. We're the eighth largest oil and gas producer. Our resources, our oil and gas and coal are actually exported out of the Gulf of America. So it is something that is at the forefront of the minds of the people in the state of Wyoming. I also want to point out one thing.
What does this bill do to help them?
I want to point out one other thing that you did, which is a very clever trick, which is that you asked me if I'd been asked any questions, and I told you that I had. And when you did your soliloquy there at the end, you accused me of being dishonest and disingenuous by then converting that to being the top priority. I didn't say that it was the top priority, but I did say that I was asked questions, and there has been discussions.
So let's have this semantics debate
not
then.
only in the meetings that I've held, but when I have met with people who actually have a direct connection to the Gulf of America. So I think what you're trying to imply is that Wyoming has no interest in the Gulf of America, when in fact the state of Wyoming, with our energy resources,
Ms. Hageman, have you testified in front of this? I've been generous with my time.
America.
Have you testified in front of this committee yet this year? Is this your first time testifying in front of this committee?
Probably this year, but not last year. No,
I'm asking you this year. I'm saying in the last 4 months, since the 119th Congress has started, this is your first time testifying, right?
I think so.
You're chairwoman of the Water, Fisheries, and Wildlife Subcommittee, are you not?
Yes.
And this is the first bill that you have decided to present to this committee on behalf of the state that you serve. So this notion, I'm saying to you, whether you or the Republican majority have picked this as a priority is besides the point. Clearly, this is what you all have decided to spend your time on in the opening months of the 119th Congress. Maybe that's what the people of, I guess, is what you're testifying to today, is that the people of Wyoming expect that from you and they support that. I can certainly tell you that in Colorado, of all of the issues that are important to the residents of my state, Gulf of America renaming does not crack the top 3, the top 10 of issues that my constituents care about. You clearly feel differently. That's your prerogative. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for his time questioning.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. Thank you for your testimony. Do you believe that your agency has sufficient personnel to fight what will be a very difficult wildfire season this year?
We do. We're at about exactly the same head count on wildland firefighters as last year.
Let me ask you about that number. So how many wildland firefighting personnel are currently employed by the Interior Department?
Between DOI and...
I'm talking about the Interior Department. I understand with respect to the Agriculture Department and the Forest Service. I'm asking about the Interior Department specifically.
You can ask specifically, but Brooke Rollins and I are committed to working together on this to make sure we optimize.
Mr. Secretary, here, hold on. This is not a gotcha question. Hold on. I went online this morning, the Department of Interior's website. It says 5,780 total number of federal wildland fire personnel employed by the Interior Department in 2024, right? Your predecessor published that number online so the American people could understand how many people in your agency. This isn't a gotcha. I'm just trying to figure out how many people are, what is that number for 2025? It's June of 2025.
It's essentially the same as last year because we're flat across both agencies at about 17,000
Will you commit to providing the public and us with the number, with updating the website so that we understand how many fire personnel are employed by the Interior Department?
We'll be completely transparent on all that. I'm trying to give you an answer to that question. But,
I hear you. You're representing that it's close or essential or similar. I guess I'm just trying to get some representations that we have not lost fire personnel since last year because, as you probably know, I'm sure you're aware, the Forest Service has lost many red card holders. So much so that the chief of the Forest Service put out a video earlier this week imploring those whom had been terminated from the agency to come back. Do you know how many red card holders have left the Interior Department in the last 6 months?
I do not.
You don't know how many red card holders have left your agency?
Well, if they would have left, they would have left through early retirement. We've got 13,000 that we're hiring.
Wouldn't that be something that's important to know? How many red card holders have left your agency so that we'd be ready for the fire season? I mean, again, I guess that would be another piece of data that I think would be important for this committee to consider. But I'll move on.
And you're aware that we have 13,000 flex?
I hear you. I'm well aware of that, and I'm also concerned that your agency is apparently not keeping track of the red card holders that have been purged from your agency. But in any event, let's talk about the National Park Service.
Can I just say there's been no purging?
Sir,
why do people keep saying purging? Because
Mr. Secretary,
law
I'm
enforcement.
going to ask you a question about the National Park Service. Give me an opportunity to ask you a question.
Can I say?
Do you believe the National Park Service?
You said something that's not true.
Mr. Chairman,
you said it wasn't a gotcha.
And ask you to stop the clock so I can ask the Secretary some questions. So let's talk about the National Park Service. How many positions of superintendent are vacant within the National Park Service?
A number of superintendents are vacant because of the
I'm not asking
early-
you why. I'm just asking you how many. It's not, these aren't gotcha questions. How many are vacant? Is it 1? Is it 10? We've heard that it's 100. Is 100 accurate?
We have a number of superintendents.
You won't say what the number is?
I'll be happy to get you this. We're filling positions. When a
Mr. Secretary, I mean, honestly, like, these aren't gotcha questions. If I ask a simple question.
Of course these are gotcha questions.
It's a gotcha question to ask
you won't even
how
let
many
me answer the
superintendent
question.
positions are vacant. I'll ask you why, but I first want to know the premise, which is how many are vacant. You and I both know that there are roughly 100 superintendent positions that are vacant across the country. Now, you have said that the $1 billion cut that you've proposed to the National Park Service represents cuts to overhead, right? Redundancies. I've heard you say that publicly previously, right? I'm not mischaracterizing that, I don't think. It's red tape, right? That's the kind of stuff that you're trying to cut from the National Park Service? Is that incorrect?
We're trying to cut jobs that aren't in parks. And if there's a vacancy at a superintendent, we fill it with the deputy. So it's incorrect for you to say that we have vacancies because when a superintendent takes early retirement, superintendents are at the end of their career.
We call that, when there's not a superintendent at one of our national parks, when the position is vacant, I think most American people would describe that as vacant. But in any event, what I will just say to you is that while you are cutting the National Park Service by $1 billion, or at least proposing a cut of $1 billion, cutting seasonal and temporary employees, 39% down within the National Park Service, I find it very interesting that your agency is issuing red tape edicts to national parks to put up signage for rewriting of American history at these national parks. It strikes me that perhaps the agency should be more focused on supporting our national parks, on fighting wildfires, on managing these important national jewels of the system, rather than spending its time on red tape requirements. But I see I'm out of time. I appreciate the chairman's indulgence.
Very much. Ms. Fishbach, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
I thank the chairwoman and the ranking member, and of course, welcome back to all of the chairs and ranking members, and thank you for your testimony today. I, of course, oppose this bill for all of the reasons that my colleagues, Ranking Member McGovern and Representative Scanlon, articulated. I think it is a terrible bill. I think it's cruel. I think it'll have devastating consequences, certainly for the people of Colorado that I represent, but ultimately for millions of Americans across our country. But I will also just say this before I jump into a few questions that I have for the members that are here today. I think that the process has been abysmal. It's a debasement of the way in which the House is supposed to operate. Most of you, the last time you were here in the Rules Committee was at 2 a.m. 4 weeks ago, when we last considered the House version of this bill, because House Republicans decided, in their infinite wisdom, to schedule that hearing in the dead of night, hoping that the American people would not learn what was in the bill, knowing that it was indefensible. Now, of course, a few mere hours after the United States Senate has passed this bill without any final text on what we're actually going to be voting on, we're here considering this bill. It's laughable and, in my view, deeply disrespectful to the way in which the House of Representatives is supposed to function.
Mr. Neguse.
Of course, I'm happy to yield.
Would you yield for a question?
Sure.
Are you aware that the Democrats did this when the Senate passed a 4,000-page bill and sent it over to the House, and the Rules Committee met very soon after that?
When was this?
Perhaps. I think, I'm not sure if it was the IRA. I will get you the specific date, but I don't know if you were appalled at the way the House operated then. But I figured you probably weren't aware that the precedent was set very badly by the Democrats. So thank you for yielding.
Madam Chair, I'm going to yield to the ranking member in a moment. First, I would hope that you might ask the team, your team, to provide us with that example so that we can have a more fulsome colloquy instead of you sort of citing a random example that I'm not aware of. But I also would just say, if I guess that Madam Chair is making the case that
I now have the facts, Consolidated Appropriations Bill in 2023.
So an appropriations bill that was bipartisan that the vast majority of the United States Congress voted on, that's the example you're offering compared to a reconciliation bill that is purely partisan and not a single Democratic member of the United States Senate or the House of Representatives voting on? That's the corollary to this particular bill? As Ranking Member Boyle, I think, eloquently put it in questioning, or rather in his answers to Representative Scanlon, the precedents that Republicans are setting in this Congress will certainly be leveraged down the road when political winds shift, and we have seen that on full display over the last month and a half. But in any event, the ranking member wished to jump in. I want to deprive him of that opportunity.
I want to withhold my comments because they won't be productive at this moment.
Yeah, and look, I thank the ranking member, or I suppose maybe the chair thanks the ranking member. I guess my point here is let's dispense with this notion that, you know, every one of the witnesses who are here today, on either side of the aisle, I think the Democratic members would probably concede to this, that they know what is in this bill. We don't know. It was just approved 4 hours ago. None of the members that are gathered here have gone through in detail the wraparound amendment. And I think it's disrespectful to the voters, to the citizens of the country, to pretend otherwise. Who would I ask, I don't know if it's Chair Guthrie or maybe it's Chair Smith, with respect to changes made to HSAs and FSAs and sort of medical spending accounts? I send that question to you.
Yep.
Okay, so under the prior bill, my understanding is there was a provision that allows individuals to utilize discounted health care services at workplace clinics to maintain an HSA. Is that provision still in the bill? Has it been taken out of the bill? What's the...
There's only a couple provisions of the HSAs that stayed intact. The primary care being qualified in HSAs is one.
What about the workplace clinic provision?
I don't believe so.
Okay, how about there was a provision that allows employees to convert flexible spending arrangements to health reimbursement arrangements. Did that stay in?
I will have to get back to you on that one.
Okay. What about, there was a provision, actually, you all testified to this. I remember, hard to believe because it was 3 a.m. in the morning during this Rules Committee hearing, but there was a discussion about permitting individuals below a certain income threshold to be able to contribute additional amounts to their HSA every year. Was that included, excluded?
They cut a lot of our HSAs.
Is that one of them?
That's one of them as well.
That was cut? Or?
Yeah, it's not in the bill.
Okay. I mean, part of what I'm getting at here, Chair Smith, because you alluded to this earlier, I hear you with respect to the process that you engaged in prior to the bill's consideration by this committee, the House version. But no one can argue that this is good governance, that we should all gather here and in real time figure out together what provisions of the bill that was passed by the House had survived and which were excised as part of a political gamesmanship to get the necessary votes in the Senate. That's my process point here.
If in regards to the tax portion of the bill, there's 103 different tax provisions that's in the Senate version. Of those 103, 85% of them are either identical or just technical changes because of the parliamentarian of what we passed out of the House.
What are the new ones? Are there new ones?
Yes, there are. Let me read these to you. So the new ones that they added was the dyed fuels, which is Ms. Moore's provision that she likes. New markets was included, made permanent, the new markets tax credit program. They eliminated the deduction on sports teams owners that was in there. They eliminated the SALT workaround that was within the House bill. I'm trying to just do tax through here.
Sure.
The increase in excise tax on private foundations was eliminated, which we had in the House bill. They also lowered the rates on the endowment taxes. We had a 21% rate. They kept the same brackets, but their highest is 8%. They did a child care boost to the CDC, TC, and FSAs. The CHIPS and Science Act's tax credit was adjusted in this bill, and also the charitable deduction.
I think you're missing one.
Which one is that?
Whalers.
What's that?
A new tax break for whalers, right? Am I?
Are you talking about allowing someone who uses a harpin to deduct the cost of that harpin?
Correct.
That's included. It's a business expense.
It's a new tax break,
It's
right?
a business expense that was capped at $10,000, and now they can deduct it.
Up to $50,000, right?
Yes.
Yes. Why was that added? I think we all know.
You would
right?
have to talk to the senators.
I'd have to talk to the senators. I don't know. It was kind of convenient, Chairman Smith, that was the one addition that you omitted from that list you provided. But I think I would
probably more that I.
Well,
left off
that may
here.
be the case. I think it's emblematic of the broken process that the Senate engaged in. That as we go through this 900-page bill, we will find a variety of different provisions that different senators inserted for their own purposes. And of course, one of them was this whaling tax deduction for the 160 or so people that will be able to claim that in the state of Alaska, so that one of the senators from Alaska would feel comfortable voting for the bill. I don't think that that's, in my view, the way this process should unfold. But in any event, while we're having this colloquy, Chairman Smith.
Is that all it took?
I'm not
I
sure.
mean,
Boy,
she's a cheap date if that's what it took, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, we talked a bit, or rather, I know you talked a bit with the ranking member previously about the way in which this bill's benefits are distributed, and that's been a topic of conversation throughout this hearing. I want to talk about one particular example that, to me, and it's perhaps an ideological dispute, I suspect, between the two of us here, that crystallizes the way in which this bill benefits the wealthy few. This bill includes an increase in the estate tax cap, correct? It goes up to $30 million?
$15 million per person.
$15 million per person, $30 million for a married couple.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Do you know what state benefits the most from that provision?
I can tell you of the family farmers in my congressional district that benefits from that provision, and that is what it's focused on in
what
regards
state?
to Missouri.
No, I know you represent Missouri. I'm asking you, this provision, right, in which state in the union...
How about you tell me? That would be great.
I'm happy to tell you, it's California. California has the most individuals, 742 people to be exact, 742 estates that benefited in the most recent tax year from this particular deduction, right? That is to say, by increasing it, you will... Hold on, I'll give you a chance, of course, Mr. Smith. I'm not... But the state that has the most individuals that will benefit from this provision happens to be California. That's not me saying that. That's empirical data. Now, what is the population of Missouri?
Over 6 million.
Over 6 million. It's not similar size to Colorado. How many estates were subject to this tax in the last year?
It all depends. I don't know how many people died in the last year, but what I will tell you, in your district alone, 3,700 farms, just farms, are affected by this provision for family farms.
I can tell you
that's pretty substantial.
That above
37
the limit, above the $30 million limit, right? Or excuse me, under the $28, because right now it's, what's the number now? 26 or $28 million for a married couple?
It's 14 million, 28 million.
Correct, 28 million. So I can tell you that in Missouri, the number is 44. 44 estates that ultimately would be subject to that estate tax.
I don't believe that number.
I will provide you the...
Yeah, people can make a lot of numbers,
Well,
but I can tell you in my district alone, there's over 4,000 family farms that are falling underneath this trap of the death tax.
We will follow up.
Yeah.
And happy to engage with you further on it. Chairman Arrington.
Yes, sir.
Welcome back.
Good to be back.
So this is your third time testifying in the last month and a half.
And the third time's the charm. I think I'm going to convince you to support this bill.
Here's where I'm struggling, Chairman Arrington, is that the first time you came on the budget resolution, right? Second time you came on the House version of this bill.
That's correct.
Now you're here on the Senate version of this bill.
Yes.
Every time you testify, this bill gets more expensive. right? I mean, you don't contest that. It's gotten more expensive since the first time you were here.
The Senate bill's more expensive than the House. I'll
Sure.
concede that.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
We set the targets the
Of
first
course,
time.
yeah.
Second time, we had the policies.
and this isn't, these aren't.
Yeah, gotcha questions.
Yeah, not a gotcha question. This is the Center for, Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, right? Headline, this is just 2 days ago. Newest Senate reconciliation bill would explode the debt, right? It says here, if you thought the House bill borrowed too much, and it did, the Senate manages to make things even worse. This $4 trillion borrowing bonanza is fiscally dangerous at a time of already exploding debt. It would borrow $1 trillion more than the House bill, violates the House's reconciliation instructions by hundreds of billions of dollars, littered with special interest giveaways, right? So this bill continues to get more and more expensive. Committee for Responsible Federal Budget agrees. The litany of organizations that Ranking Member Boyle and Ranking Member McGovern agree. The House Freedom Caucus, of course, of which we have a number of members here that serve on the committee, that are members of the committee. They concede that as well, right? Tweeted out, the Senate's version adds $651 billion to the deficit, and that's before interest costs, which nearly double the total. Chairman, I have made this request of you every time you're here, that at some juncture, you might say, you know, this is a bridge too far. Because you have championed deficit reduction earlier in your career. But, you know, the Speaker is asking you to defend something that is indefensible with respect to deficit reduction. And it's not me making this case. So I just, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond here, but what do you say to the House Freedom Caucus? What do you say to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget? Why not engage in a conference? Why accept what the Senate has sent you at face value? You're the chairman of the Budget Committee.
Well, I think you would agree that in large legislative initiatives like this one, Democrat-led or Republican, there are things you like about a bill, things you don't like about a bill, things that you, and certainly that exists for this bill with me. I have my policy preferences, and I'm certain that my colleagues do as well. I'm concerned that neither party has been serious in addressing this unsustainable debt trajectory that we're on and a debt crisis that looms large for the country. I'm concerned that neither party has.
But you're the chair. I mean, you have the opportunity to guide that now.
And
You've got a lot of authority.
And as you know, I've championed that concern.
Help me understand why did it get more expensive? So here, maybe that's a sort of
I
too
think
simplistic of a question. What happened in the Senate? Why did this bill get more expensive?
Yeah,
What did they add that increased the cost?
Well, the savings in the on the SNAP side or in the ag jurisdiction, I think it's about $100 billion loss in savings on the Senate side versus the House side. There were more savings in the Senate on Medicaid reform versus the House side. You know, all of that, when you go through the details on
but it's still way more expensive.
No, I'm going to get to exactly. I think it's mostly a wash on mandatory program reforms. Gain some, lose some. The tax policy is where the additional expenses. That's where the preponderance of the difference in cost in the Senate versus the House.
So why not go through this bill and find some opportunities to get some of the pork out of the bill, which I presume would, maybe satiate some of your colleagues in the House Freedom Caucus, certainly would be a lot less harmful to the deficit. I mean, why not? Let me give you an example. Yeah. This bill includes a slush fund for OMB upwards of $100 million. You're familiar with that?
I'm familiar with a lot of the funding.
Right,
in this
and
bill.
that wasn't in the House version. So, you're not going to ask all of your colleagues to just give a $100 million blank check to the Office of Management and Budget. That doesn't seem like good fiscal policy to me. I can't imagine that you think that that's good fiscal policy.
Well, if it was used, for example, to
oh, come on, Chair.
No, this is a fair and true statement, and I think I've said it before. If I haven't, I've believed it. I think there are ways to invest money in the oversight and the infrastructure to actually prevent fraudulent and even unintended overpayments.
So is there no pork
there's
in this
ways-
bill then?
There's, and OMB, in fairness to OMB.
No, I'm talking about in the bill.
Yeah.
There's no pork in this bill that we can take. It's a pork-free bill in your view? That's it? This is just...
If you'll ask me specifics.
What about the Garden of Heroes? $40 million for President Trump's Garden of Heroes. Can't we, why not just say, you know what? We've got a huge deficit, and that's probably not the most prudent way to spend our taxpayer dollars. Let's just reallocate that $40 million. That's a bridge too far for you?
Well, I think there's not a bill that I've read and reviewed since I've been a member of Congress, certainly since I've been the budget chair, that I felt lived up perfectly to what I thought we ought to do in stewardship of tax dollars, and what I thought was consistent with the constitutional scope and
I hear you.
of this,
I hear you, Chair
of
Arrington,
this
but I
federal
think
government.
you could understand our struggle because, as I said, last 7 weeks, you've testified a few times here. Every time you testify, this bill gets more expensive, and the answer is always, well, down the road, you know, of course, we could address this, and there are ways in which we can try to identify potential places where funding, you know, where potential cuts can be identified, and so on and so forth. Here is an example right in front of you. $40 million. You could take care of that today. There's an amendment, I believe, that was submitted. You could rule that in order and say, you know what, we're going to put that $40 million towards deficit reduction. If you're serious about wanting to address the fiscal health of the country. But to me, I think this bill couldn't be a worse representation, respectfully, of fiscal discipline. You have a bill that, according to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, is more aggregated than the CARES Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the CHIPS and Science Bill combined. Combined. All 4 bills are equivalent. This bill takes the cake. It's bigger than all of them. And I just don't know how one can justify supporting it.
I disagree with that statement.
I
but
know
hear
you
what
disagree
you're
with that
saying.
assessment
Okay.
on the, and I'm hoping I can get you, maybe by the end of this hearing, to support the removing the Garden of Heroes funding so that we can at least maybe make a crack at addressing some, you know, fiscal sanity in the country. Maybe Mr. Roy might consider supporting that amendment. We'll see. I wonder, obviously we've talked a lot about all the folks who oppose this bill. I'm sure you saw Elon Musk has been very vocal about his opposition to this bill. You're aware of that.
I am aware of that.
And
sincerely held convictions.
You disagree with, you think he's wrong?
No, I think he has sincerely held convictions about the runaway spending.
But then why not follow his, I mean, he
I don't-
has
I don't
encouraged everybody to.
I don't follow any man in
You don't follow any man?
I follow my conscience.
Let me read you a quote.
If
from
I may,
let me
just
let me
because
just finish this quote. I'll read it to you, then you
Okay,
can respond.
and then you'll let me
This is
respond.
from your website. This is from your website on May 29th. Quote, this is the headline, Arrington applauds Elon Musk's leadership. And the quote here is, we should not only appreciate Elon's courageous leadership, but follow it by holding Washington accountable, rooting out waste, restoring fiscal sanity before the debt burden crushes the future of this great nation. So I don't,
I
sounds
agree.
like you were telling people about a month ago that
100%.
that folks should follow his lead on debt
100%.
reduction, but it's a different tune you're
No,
singing
it's
today.
not. We cut twice the amount of spending that has ever been reduced in the people's government in the history of the people's government. So, you know, if you're looking to make the argument this bill isn't perfect when it comes to any principle, including fiscal discipline, you win.
Well, I appreciate
Because it's
that.
not perfect. And so you win. I mean, honestly. But to say that, you know, the old Ronald Reagan 80-20, fill in the blank, in not so perfect processes, in a political process, having significant reforms on the fiscal side, like the spending cuts, like the welfare reforms that are long overdue, much needed, like preventing, which 40 some odd Democrats opposed,
preventing taxpayer dollars to flow to people who are here illegally. That, I think, is all consistent with what I
hear you.
understand Elon Musk's
And I hear you, Mr.
concerns are.
Chairman, but I would just simply say, I mean, again, it's part of the frustration for me, and I suspect many Americans, is that there's sort of this notion that we don't have the agency to shape the bill. So, if we as a Congress decide that we don't really want to have special interest tax breaks for tanning salons, as was the case in the original bill that the House put forward, or for whaling deductions, all right? If we decide that we don't want to spend $40 million on the Garden of Heroes at the White House, we can proceed with shaping policy that does precisely that. And I would just venture to say, Mr. Chairman, that it feels like you have an opportunity here. You have a number of members on this committee on the other side of the aisle who've expressed their opposition to the bill and their indication that they're going to vote against the rule. And I would hope that you take that opportunity to perhaps change course. I want to move to the snap cuts and also just the agriculture title of the bill, and to Ranking Member Craig and to Chairman Thompson. So, Chairman Thompson, I guess I want to understand more clearly what you all are trying to achieve with the state cost, this sort of new imposition of state costs with respect to SNAP. Because my understanding was that this was designed originally to try to incentivize improvement in SNAP payments, right? State-based, right? Basically to reduce the error rate. Is that right, or am I?
Yeah, the ultimate goal was to have the state, who's a partner within the SNAP nutrition program. Obviously, they've had no skin in the game before, and as I said in my opening remarks, there is a tendency, if you're spending somebody else's money, you're reckless with it. If you have to spend even part of your own money, you pay closer to the attention of the effectiveness. And we have been, the error rates have been...
It's a real problem.
It's been a real problem. My own state of Pennsylvania, under Governor Shapiro, it was at 17%. I'm glad they got it down to 11% as of the data that came out yesterday, but that's still unacceptable. If it's an underpayment, that's a family that's, once their EBT, is looking to their EBT card to be loaded appropriately, so when they go to the grocery store, they know that resource there. It's not... And it's supplemental. It's in addition to everything else in their lives, right? But still, if it's an underpayment, it hurts those family members. If it's an overpayment, believe it or not, it hurts even more. They're going to spend it because it's there. But then the states will come back, whether it's 2 months or 6 months, and they'll claw all that back. And all of a sudden, these families find that they have no money in a given month. And so these error rates have been absolutely the
bottom line, we got to get the error rates down.
Absolutely. So this is meant to be an incentive.
Exactly.
And
here's the question. Yep. Under the bill as it's drafted now, the higher your error rate, the more likely you are to get a waiver not to have to pay anything as a state.
Well, it's short term. It's for a number of years.
But why give states?
Well, you know what? You'd have to sit down with the senators to figure out why they did that. Alaska's one of them, I think.
But does that make sense to you?
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania named the states that wound up on that.
Correct. The 10 states: Oregon, New Jersey.
It was a Senate amendment delayed implementation of state, and it's a delayed implementation of state cost share. It doesn't.
Why does that? I guess what I'm trying to understand, and you may not.
Why did they do it?
Well,
we're all in politics. We know why they did it in the Senate, in order to get certain votes from certain states.
And if that is the case, does that not violate the very objective that you all were trying to achieve? Let me explain why, and I'll give you a chance.
Doesn't long term, because it does result in a state share.
Let's say it this way.
It just gives them more time to be able to get there.
Let me say it this way. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Royce here, Texas has an error rate that hovers around 6%. So right now, under the bill, as it is proposed, Texas wouldn't necessarily, if it stays below that 6%, doesn't have to pay a state portion-based cost for SNAP. If it gets above 6%, say jumps up to 6.5%. For the next several years, Texas, the state of Texas, and Texas taxpayers have to foot the bill of a state
pro rata cost.
That's correct.
Hold on,
Something they've
I'm not
never
asking
had
a
a
question.
payment-
Mr.
they've
Thompson.
never had a payment in.
I'm not asking a question. Texas has to
Please
do
do.
so. I will. Texas has to do so. Oregon right now, which has one of the highest error rates in the country, does not have to pay a single taxpayer dollar towards this program. You have designed a program in which you are incentivizing states to have a higher error rate. If you're a state, and Ranking Member Craig, maybe no, I'm asking Ranking Member
It's a
Craig
transition
question.
plan.
She can answer if she'd like. If you are a state with an error rate of 10% or 11% or 12%, if you can get your error rate higher,
That's right.
then under this bill, you won't have to pay a dime.
And you get, under this bill that came back today from the Senate, in fact, you get 2 bites at the apple over 2 years to get your error rate up so that you can not have to pay the cost shift for a period of time.
It's insanity.
It's
So
insanity.
A state like Colorado or Missouri or Texas, the states that are trying to keep their error rates down and are doing a good job of it, they get penalized. Meanwhile, New Jersey, Oregon, Alaska, states with a high error rate benefit. Insanity. I don't, and maybe there's another Republican here, Chairman, and I know this is not outside of your respective departments. So, but if Chair Guthrie or Chair Arrington or Chair Smith want to jump in to defend that particular provision, I don't. And by the way, I mean, before I give that opportunity, I don't know. We'll see if this bill passes in the House. But I can assure you that if it doesn't pass, if there are enough Republican members who say, you know what, this is a bridge too far, this provision is not surviving. It's not going to survive the sunlight of the next 48 hours. There's no way. I am calling it now. I cannot imagine that Republicans are going to say, yeah, we're fine with Portland paying not a dime for a state portion of SNAP. We're going to instead just make sure that we impose these costs on the states that are actually doing a good job.
And you do realize that none of the states will
Are
pay
doing it
for
now,
the
correct.
immediate future. Zero
course.
states, because it is an implementation
Yes, but you've
plan.
delayed it even further for the worst offenders. So this, basically, if you're a state, you are incentivized to get that error rate up. Get it up to 18%. That way you can delay having to comply with this mandate as long as possible. Ranking Member Craig?
Mr. Neguse, excuse me, I just want to say I may never have another chance in my entire career here to say that I agree with Chip Roy. So I'd like to get that on the record here in my testimony today. And secondly, beyond the Republicans in this room agreeing that this is a good policy, try going home to your own constituents in a state with a low error rate and explaining to your county commissioners why they, in 10 states across this country, are actually going to have to increase taxes at the local level so that these 10 states, the other 10 states with high error rates, don't have to pay their fair share of taxes. Again, I've just never seen anything as ridiculous as what we've seen come over from the Senate. And I wish my colleagues on the other side of the aisle could stand up and say, no, we need more time, we need to fix this.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you, Ranking Member Craig. I think you articulated it well. As I said, whaling taxes, tanning salons, all the pork and nonsense that has been included in this bill, this provision really is the most nonsensical. And Chair Arrington?
If I may.
Maybe you might go ahead,
Yeah,
of
if I
course.
may.
Yeah.
You know what the cost share is today of states that have an error rate of, let's just use Alaska since it's a subject of conversation, 60%. 60%, 60 cents on the dollar error rate. You know what the policy is today and under the last 4 years of the Democrat administration and the leadership of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle?
Yes,
Zero.
no cost. Yeah,
Zero.
correct.
Zero. So I believe you to be a fair person. I'm sure that the indignation that you have over not phasing this in as quickly as maybe we all would want, I certainly would be one to say we should implement it effective immediately, but it hasn't even existed, and I think you would agree.
But why give that special break to New Jersey?
Over
Texas.
I don't know that I can answer that, but I can tell you that having 4 years when you all had total control over this process, when you jammed a partisan bill, it was a tax and spending bill, called the Inflation Reduction Act. This wasn't addressed then. I would say kudos to Republicans. It's not perfect, once again, but we're going to phase in accountability for states who have a 60 cents on the dollar error rate. If we could get that implemented today, I'd take it. If we can get it in 2 years, that's better than what it was.
I indulge you,
Okay.
Chairman. I would just simply say, I think that's going to be a hell of an argument to make to the people in West Texas 2 years from now to say, look, I get it. I know y'all are paying more now for SNAP, by virtue of this new mandate, but just rest assured, the people in Oregon and the people in New Jersey who are, or rather the state governments there, who are doing a far worse job with respect to the error rate, don't worry, they're not paying a dime. That doesn't seem like an argument that I would think Republicans want to make to their constituents, but I'm not a Republican. So, Ranking Member Craig?
Yeah, I just like to, this is, certainly want to make sure all my Republican colleagues know this, but high error rates actually are subject to sanctions. And in fact, USDA fined Alaska $12 million last year for failing to ensure SNAP recipients are eligible. Pennsylvania was fined as well over the last couple of years. So there is a penalty for high error rates in this country.
Thank you.
But now there's a reward for them.
Last question I have for Chair Guthrie. Couldn't of course, didn't want you to feel neglected here. I want to talk about the hospital fee, the provider fees. Ranking Member McGovern kind of cited to some of the criticism and the concern that the Senate bill that we're now considering has elicited from rural hospitals. That's certainly true in my district. I think, as you and I maybe talked previously, I represent a really large geographic district in western Colorado, a lot of rural hospitals who are deeply concerned that if this bill is signed into law, it's going to be devastating for rural parts of my district. And I have read similar refrains from folks in Kentucky, right? So the article that Ranking Member McGovern quoted, the title is Kentucky Hospitals Leader warns Senate megabill would devastate health care and the economy. And I'll just quote to you 2 sentences. The advocacy group for Kentucky hospitals is sounding the alarm about a massive bill that's near passage in the U.S. Senate, saying its cuts to Medicaid could cause the closure of hospitals and loss of 20,000 jobs. The Kentucky Hospital Association has changed its tune on the bill since May, when it supported a version that passed the House, making it an outlier among state and national healthcare groups. So the point here, right, Chairman, is that even those organizations that maybe had a different worldview than mine about the House bill are now ringing the alarm very loudly, saying there will be rural hospitals that could potentially close in Kentucky and in Colorado. And I make the same request of you that I made of Chair Arrington. Why not conference with the Senate and say, you know what, this is untenable. I'm not going to allow Owensboro Health Twin Lakes Medical Hospital, right, which is one of the hospitals in your district, right, that just said recently, while we don't know the direct impact any potential changes would have, we are certain the proposed cuts to Medicaid will harm access to health care not only in Western Kentucky but across the country. I mean, clearly, this is going to have an impact. I just don't think that anyone can argue in good faith that it's not going to.
So if we all discuss this, and we discussed it in the House, and if you look at provider taxes, it goes back to President Obama. So the Senate version takes it to 3.5% for states that didn't expand, or that did expand. Kentucky's an expansion state. President Obama had that number for a safe harbor for provider taxes within his 2014 budget. President Biden called it a scam. I've never called it a scam. It's a loophole. The provider tax is a loophole. And I would understand hospitals and others that if they can take their money, come up, match federal money, and bring it back down to the state. So we knew that it needed to be addressed. We chose in the House version to do it with a freeze so that people would have what they had this year for next year. The Senate has chosen, and we're debating, and we're going to be debating, I'm sure, after we get through this rules meeting, about where we go with it. But if you look at Medicaid policy, a lot of the issues has been that particularly now that it's 90-10 for expansion states, that when it was first designed in the 1960s and through most of the time, states run the policy. It's an open-ended checkbook on the federal government, But the discipline has always been that the states have to put their money in as well. But now they're able to tax the healthcare entities that receive the money. Some states are actually taxing the managed care, Medicaid managed care organizations that receive the money. And so it's just become almost an open-ended checkbook on the federal government. So we're going to debate it and see which way we go. But I will tell you that it needs to be addressed, and we intend to address it, and we'll see where we go.
Well, I will stop. Yeah, I see that my time is running along here, so I appreciate the chairwoman's indulgence. I'll simply say there are a lot of rural hospitals that will close if this bill becomes law.
Well, so that assumes, because I had some people from Kentucky come to me, since you brought Kentucky up, and say, y'all need to make this a priority. When we were debating whether it was going to cut back, y'all need to make this a priority. It's people from Kentucky government. And so that says, well, and then my answer back to him, why don't you make it a priority? Because so the 3.5% is where the state takes the money to match. And so they don't have to put any money in their general fund. So they're wanting us to make it a priority, which I do make it a priority. I want my hospitals to be successful, but the state also has to pay their share as well.
And I would just simply say, similar to the point that I articulated in my colloquy with Chair Arrington, I think it's going to be awfully tough. It's going to be awfully tough for your members to make the argument that you just made. I hear what you're saying. I understand you're saying, well, the state needs to step up to the plate and so on and so forth, and state legislatures will have to. That's an argument that you're obviously entitled to make, but there's a reason that the House bill didn't include the cut that the Senate bill has now proposed with respect to the rate, to the hospital rate fee, and so, or excuse me, to the hospital provider rate. And in my view, I think it's a mistake, and I think it's going to have devastating consequences for rural America. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Mr. Roy, you're recognized.
I thank the chairwoman. It is rare indeed that I have too many reasons to agree in this room, but I do have to go ahead and start with
the gentleman from Colorado for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding this hearing, and I want to thank both of our witnesses for your service to our country and for your testimony today. I want to pick up on a point that was just articulated by my colleague from South Carolina. Both of you have served with distinction as federal judges. You both had very extensive and distinguished careers in private practice, as well as in the government. Assistant U.S. attorneys, a variety of different high-profile cases that both of you prosecuted in the past. You both were appointed by President Trump to your current positions on the respective Circuit Court of Appeals in which you serve, and you both were confirmed unanimously by the United States Senate, which is no easy feat. Do either of you believe that the federal judiciary is, quote, politically compromised, end quote, as my colleague from South Carolina just suggested? Judge Scudder?
I don't. Thank you for your compliments. I don't. My experience in the Seventh Circuit and with my colleagues all around the country is very much in keeping with the comments and the observations that Representative Raskin made with respect to the seriousness with which judges take their oath and approach each case or controversy that comes before them. To look at the facts and the law, to try to get it right, recognizing that there's an appellate process in place if the losing party disagrees, where the ruling can be challenged.
Judge St. Eve?
I would echo Judge Scudder's comments, and thank you for your compliments. I've been a judge for 23 years now and feel the exact same way that Judge Scudder does.
Well, I want to say thank you both for your candor, and I think it is important contextually for this committee and I think for the American public to hear jurists such as yourselves articulate what you just described. And of course, the reason is self-evident. This hearing, it's a bit odd because if one were watching it, you'd think it's a fairly atypical, or excuse me, not an atypical hearing, a fairly normal hearing discussing budgetary and technology matters that the judiciary is trying to grapple with. And yet, we find ourselves in very abnormal times. I'm sure it's not lost on either of you that several of my Republican colleagues are actively debating
defunding federal district courts, potentially defunding circuit courts that issue opinions that they disagree with. You all are aware of this. I'm sure you've seen some reporting in the news that suggests this. I can represent to you that having served on this committee and served in the House and been witness to the conversations over the last 5 months, that's an active matter of consideration. How do you respond to that? What would it mean, Judge St. Eve, if the Congress were to defund a district court? You heard my colleague from South Carolina vociferously attacking Judge Boasberg, who I suspect you know.
We've submitted our budget for fiscal year 26 of $9.4 billion and can justify our requests for the court security, the defenders, the S&E account, and the fees of jurors. And as I said in my oral statement earlier, funding of the courts is essential for us to carry out our constitutional and statutory duties.
And I completely concur with your assessment on that front. But I guess, and I recognize it is a question that may be a bit uncomfortable, but again, this is an atypical time we find ourselves in. How will the Budget Committee of the Judicial Conference respond if the Congress successfully defunds a district court? So if that happens, that could happen. The Republicans have signaled in the majority that at least some of them would like to defund a district court in Massachusetts or the Washington District Court. How will the Judicial Conference respond to that? Is that will just be the new normal, that essentially Congress is allowed and permitted to exact political retribution against a judge if they rule in a way that a majority of the Congress disagrees with?
Again, our funding is essential for the judges in every district, in every circuit, to carry out their constitutional and statutory duties, and we need that funding in order to do so.
Well, I appreciate your answer. I would simply suggest that given the abnormal nature of the times we find ourselves in, I would hope that the Judicial Conference is actively discussing how it will respond if and when proposals like the one that I've just described ultimately materialize. Because with all respect for both of you, I think the response of the Judicial Conference will have to be more squarely designed to address this particular issue rather than the sort of broader budget proposal and the justifications that you've offered. At the end of the day, if the Judicial Conference is unwilling to defend the propriety of not having the Congress defund a particular district court, that's going to be a very untenable position, I think. That would be my request of all of you, and I thank the chairman for his indulgence on the time. I yield back.
My indulgence knows no limits for good reason. And I will note for the record that we know of no request to defund the court. And I would also, for the record, because all of us on the top dais have been here a while, we've all seen the disruption that it's caused by government shutdowns to branch, including Article 3, and would say that all the proposals by one-of-a-kind members who might say something like that pale in comparison to even a few days of shutting down the government, which often disrupts the court in a huge way. And with that, I go to my...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're on the floor this week debating 3 Congressional Review Act resolutions that would overturn balanced, forward-looking resource management plans, or RMPs, that have been carefully developed over the past 4 years. Now, with all due respect to my friend and colleague, the chairman, I heard a lot of slogans, a couple references to Moscow. I will just tell you, the CRA before this body is very simple. It is an effort by House Republicans to do something that has never been done before in the history of the Congressional Review Act, which is to overturn a resource management plan. Why, you might ask, Mr. Speaker? Do Republicans intend to take this unprecedented step? Simple, because they'd like to open up millions of acres in Montana, in North Dakota, and elsewhere to coal extraction. That's it. Very simple. We can probably dispense with I guess there's an hour of debate that we're allocated for purposes of these CRAs. It doesn't really get more complicated than that. Balanced resource management plans that were developed in consultation with the communities and the states at issue. And this Republican Congress has decided that it is of the utmost priority to, via legislative action, overturn resource management plans that, by the way, Mr. Speaker, could simply be reversed with a phone call to the Secretary of the Interior. Last time I checked, the Secretary of the Interior happens to be the former governor of North Dakota. So insofar as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are so invested in overturning this resource management plan, perhaps they should call the former governor of North Dakota, who now works 2 miles from the U.S. Capitol, as the Secretary of the Interior, and ask the agency to follow the process by which a resource management plan is historically reconsidered. Instead, we're here on the House floor debating a CRA on the resource management plan, a giveaway to some of the biggest mining and oil companies on the planet. That's how House Republicans have decided to spend our time on the floor today. There are a lot of priorities, Mr. Speaker, that my constituents back in Colorado believe this House should consider. Reversing the draconian and cruel health care cuts that House Republicans pushed through just a mere 7 weeks ago. That is at the top of the list. I can tell you what's not on the list. CRA resolutions to overturn resource management plans so that more coal extraction and mining can be done in Montana. That's not on the list of priorities of my constituents, and I suspect that's the case for the vast majority of Americans. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll reserve the balance of my time. Gentleman from Colorado.
Gentleman yielding. With that, we now recognize the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Director Patel, for being here today. I have a couple of questions regarding a terrible shooting that occurred in Colorado, a state, as you may know, that I represent. You've testified previously about, I think, what you would describe as your efforts to provide more information regarding the investigation with respect to the horrific assassination of Mr. Kirk. And so, in that same vein, I'm hoping you can provide this committee and my constituents in Colorado with some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think, as my colleagues know, in Evergreen, Colorado, Jefferson County, a county that I proudly represent, at Evergreen High School, a shooter ultimately injured. 2 students were praying for their swift recovery. There's an article here from Colorado Public Radio. The title is, quote, FBI was already investigating an account that may have been linked to the Evergreen shooter. You're familiar with the circumstances generally, Director, regarding this terrible tragedy.
Yes.
So my understanding from the public reporting is that an organization reported to the FBI in July of this year regarding, just reading here from the article, that the FBI opened an assessment into a social media account user whose identity was unknown and who was discussing the planning of a mass shooting with threats nonspecific in nature. This is the FBI's statement to the press. And that the FBI continued to work this assessment investigation to identify the name and location of the user up until September 10th, 2025, which was the day of the tragedy. Can you provide us some clarity on what were the impediments to finding, the account user, and maybe describe in greater detail the FBI's work in that regard?
Generally speaking, yes, because I know even though the shooter's deceased, the investigation we're not done.
Sure.
And so the impediments to finding these individuals, and you highlight a great point. We had 2 huge tragedies in the span of days in this country, the school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado being one of them. And proactively going out onto these social media platforms, which are so large, is our biggest impediment. And we need to rely on the service providers. There's actual legislation, I can't remember the name of it, that's up for renewal, which will, and I think at the end of the month, which gives service providers the ability to report that information in from their end without liability. We need that to continue, because while the FBI has so many people and the police are great at doing it, there's just too many platforms to cover down on.
Well, I appreciate that, Director Patel, and I think we're certainly, I'm interested in continuing this conversation, because I think the reporting suggests that that there's a pattern, and that ultimately, we want to make sure that law enforcement is able to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening in the future. I have a question. It's not meant as a gotcha question, so it just frame it there. But it is in regards to some reporting around a periodic transaction report that you had filed earlier, this year. So this is in July, pursuant to the ethical obligations as a senior executive official. You remember filing that in July?
Yes.
Yeah. So in that report, as best as I can surmise, you disclosed that you divested $100,000 or more in a variety of different stocks, which I presume was pursuant to the ethics agreement that you negotiated with the Department of Justice. In that same report, there's a disclosure regarding purchases of two different transactions. So between $15,000 to $50,000 in a national coffee house chain, and between $50,000 to $100,000 in a semiconductor company on May 9th and May 12th. Are those transactions that you're doing personally, or are these through a stockbroker, or are these transactions that you're handling yourself?
So how they happen is I submit proposals under DOJ guidance to say, hey, I would like to trade this or that, and they run their review, and the FBI runs a review, and then they come back and say yes or no, and then I make the transaction.
Is there a reason that you decided to make the purchases into those two companies?
Generally speaking, before I got this job, I was, trading stocks, but not a lot, like most people, and I just follow certain industries, and I thought they would be a good investment.
So the reason why I ask, right, because you had divested in other companies, and I presume that wasn't because there were actual conflicts. It's just that you wanted to avoid an appearance of impropriety.
It was both.
Both, but not all of the companies were conflicts.
Whatever they make
divested from.
I don't make the call, they make the call.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess my point would be, the reason why I ask is, why I said it's not a gotcha question, I have for years led an effort here in Congress to try to ban members of Congress, senior executive officials, from trading stocks. And it's bipartisan in nature. We're working really hard to get that done, Republicans and Democrats. And you can understand, I think, given your role, given the nature of the position that you hold as the leader of the largest law enforcement agency in our country, that divesting entirely, not doing day trading now, I think would be something that would be in the interest of the American people. So I just would hope you would consider that, and that moving forward, that perhaps not purchasing stocks in individual companies, I would think would be something that would be worth pursuing.
Gentleman's time is...
I'm happy to give the witness an opportunity to answer.
Thank you. I'll work with you on it.
Gentleman from...
Ranking Member Neguse for his opening statement.
I thank the ranking member, I thank the chairman for his paneling of this important hearing today. And I want to say to Chief Schultz, thank you for being here today, and look forward to your testimony. Also appreciated the opportunity to visit with you prior to this hearing several months ago, and certainly appreciated the fact that we could have an open and transparent dialogue about our nation's federal forests. It won't surprise you, Chief, to hear that I am completely unfamiliar with the description of the Forest Service that my friend, the chairman from Wisconsin, just described. There were references to fiscal sanity, the notion that the Forest Service is operating, better than it has ever before. That is entirely contradicted by the factual record and the realities that we have heard on the ground in western Colorado, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in greater detail today. Since Donald Trump reassumed office in January, the Forest Service has lost thousands of career experts who've taken the deferred resignation or early retirement programs. In addition to the thousands of employees who've been thrown into uncertainty as they've been unceremoniously fired and then rehired. By the way, I think, as the chairman well understands, 1,400 of these people were red card holders. Probably not the smartest idea to have them leave the agency in advance of wildfire season in the Rocky Mountain West and across the western United States. Hard-pressed to describe that as anything resembling sanity. Many agency staff fear more firings to come, especially with USDA's proposed reorganization plan that creates even more uncertainty for Forest Service employees. Now, I will say, and it's certainly something that I think is important to concede, my office has heard for years about the Forest Service's chronic understaffing. Even before January, the Forest Service's workforce was nearly 30% less than it was 3 decades ago, even as visitation and wildfire risk have dramatically increased over that same time frame. And yet, the draconian budget cuts that have been proposed by the Trump administration, if they ultimately became law, would result in a 40%, nearly 40% decrease in staff at the Forest Service from 2004 levels. I understand that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are very impassioned about timber production. Unclear to me how they intend to have any of these permits or leases or contracts executed when there is no staff at the Forest Service to do it. At the end of the day, this is simple math. Cutting the workforce by nearly 40%, juxtaposed to fiscal year 2024 levels, is not common sense policy. It is dangerous, and it will have enormous implications. It cannot be justified as simply promoting efficiency or cutting waste and fraud. Stripping the Forest Service for parts threatens the safety of communities in the wildland-urban interface for whom fire is an enormous concern. The folks that I represent. I have the privilege of representing 3 national forests in western Colorado: the Arapahoe Roosevelt, the White River, the Route National Forest. They are struggling. And I don't buy it for a second. My colleagues, I guess we'll hear from them today, but insofar as they may suggest, particularly those who represent western states, that there isn't a crisis looming for the Forest Service in their respective jurisdictions, I just don't buy that that's not the case. It is contradicted by the facts on the ground. I am concerned by the continued hiring freeze at the agency. I would encourage you, Mr. Chief, to end this freeze in order to adequately staff the Forest Service, meet its responsibilities to the American people. I share the outrage that I've heard from constituents in Colorado and beyond about this administration's attacks on the Forest Service, its employees, the grant programs, the land management efforts, and again, the agency's world-class wildfire response efforts. I truly believe, I think the Forest Service is one of the crown jewels of our federal government. And I would urge my colleagues, insofar as they may share that same view, to work with us in good faith to support the Forest Service, not to decimate it, which is what's happening right now. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.